My great kingdom of Italy. This video is purely for entertainment and does not infringe on copyrights or laws. The rights to the novel and image belong to the original author. We do not claim ownership. Don't like waiting and want to listen to this fanfic in full now? Subscribe to our Patreon, where you'll find the best fanfics. Chapter 251. A surprising move. Admiral Cadorna did receive the news earlier than Rome. He received the news at his headquarters in the morning, when the Ottomans began to take action in Adrianople. In addition to the distance that kept him well informed, he also had the help of the Bulgarians. As for the reason, you don't need to guess. They also want to use this news to stimulate the Italians. After all, most of the Bulgarian troops are in Adrianople, so helping the Italians is helping themselves. The Bulgarians were right. When the news of the Ottoman attack in Adrianople was learned by Admiral Cadorna, he immediately realized the problem. The Ottomans wanted to rescue the surrounded Macedonian army, so they launched a desperate attack on the Bulgarians. As the supreme commander of the Macedonian region, Admiral Cadorna has enough experience to know what to do, and now he must step up the offensive against Skopje. This does not mean that the previous coalition offensive against Skopje was not enough. You must know that, whether it was the Italian army as the main force or the Bulgarian and Montenegrin troops attacking on the side, the offensive against Skopje was equally fierce. But Ney seemed to know that this was his last battle, and the local Ottoman defenders seemed to have taken a hit of gunpowder and braced themselves to withstand the coalition's offensive. Even if the casualties were considerable, they were still not allowed to retreat at all. Therefore, it is a pity that the coalition forces still have not been able to break through the outer positions of the Ottoman defenders. The experienced General Cadorna naturally knew the intentions of the defenders. The opponent wanted to take advantage of the peripheral terrain to block the coalition's offensive. Cadorna had to praise this. The opponent's commander, General Yilmaz, did a very good job, because as long as you open the map, you can see that Skopje is actually in a basin-like terrain, surrounded by mountains and hills. The terrain makes it necessary for the defenders to defend the surrounding perimeter if they want to defend the place. Therefore, the Ottomans could not use the combat plan of Pleven Fortress in the 10th Turkish-Russian War this time. They could only defend the periphery, not the city. Besides, the two are different. Skopje is a city, not a fortress. Under the current firepower, local buildings with brick and wood structures cannot withstand the artillery attack of the coalition forces. Faced with the Ottomans' tortoise-shell defensive tactics, there are actually many ways to solve them. Take the most reliable method at present. Italy is moving step by step, with artillery as the leader, aligning to carry out fierce attacks, and then launching infantry attacks against them. Offensive. The casualty figures for such an offensive are definitely very good. The only drawback is that the time is too slow, and the ammunition consumption is not small. However, this method is definitely not a good method for the current Admiral Cadorna, because it takes too much time, and does not meet his requirements at all. For this reason, he thought of another way. He called his secretary and asked, "Is Lieutenant General Simeon here?" "It hasn't arrived yet." When I called to inquire before, Lieutenant General Simeon had already left not long ago. It is expected to arrive soon. After hearing the secretary's answer, Admiral Cadorna continued, "When he arrives, bring him to see me immediately, as you command, Your Excellency." After the secretary left, the chief of staff of the Italian army lowered his head to deal with the documents on his desk that were about to be buried. This was his workload today. As for Lieutenant General Simeon, whom General Cadorna was waiting for, he had just arrived in the town where the army headquarters was located. Simeon sat on the carriage and looked at the extremely busy town. He had just led the team to withdraw from the position 2 days ago. He was summoned by the Chief of General Staff as soon as he took a breath. When the driver showed his ID to the town checkpoint sentry, he noticed that the town was busier than the last time he came here. After passing the checkpoint, the carriage headed directly for the army headquarters. As soon as his feet stepped onto the entrance of the command post, an officer who had been waiting at the door immediately came forward to greet him. "Hello, Lieutenant General Simeon. The general is waiting for you in the office." "Okay, Simone," was greeted and immediately followed him with 3 steps and 2 steps at a time. After entering the headquarters, a noisy scene appeared in front of him, full of officers walking fast. Simone passed through them and walked all the way to Admiral Cardona's office point. When he arrived at the door, the secretary knocked on his door. "What's up, Admiral?" Cardona's voice came from inside. "Your Excellency, Lieutenant General Simeon is here. Invite him in quickly." As Admiral Cardona's voice fell, Simone stepped into the office. "Simone, have a good journey, Admiral." Cardona, who saw Simone, asked him with a smile on his face. Faced with Admiral Cardona's question, Simeon answered naturally, "Very well, Your Majesty." After a brief greeting, the two soldiers immediately got down to business. "Based on the current offensive, Simeon, how long do you think it will take us to break through the enemy's defenses?" Faced with the question raised by Admiral Cardona, Simeon, who had carefully observed it from the front line, thought for a while and answered, "If nothing happens in the middle, it will take at least half a month." Simeon's answer made General Cardona very satisfied, because he also inspected the frontline positions, and this was the same as his observation point. The main reason for the two military commanders to answer this way is that the current offensive is not going well. Although in the early stages of the battle, Italy took advantage of heavy artillery to force the Ottoman defenders to abandon their positions, the advantage of the mountainous terrain made it difficult for them to attack in the second half. The main problem is that the coalition offensive is already within the range of Ottoman heavy artillery. Every time they attacked, heavy artillery from the Ottoman army brought the coalition offensive to a halt. No one is willing to launch a life-threatening offensive under the bombardment of various enemy artillery. Even the Bulgarians, who are famous for their bravery, are like this. This has happened before. The Bulgarian army wanted to increase its attack power. As a result, a brigade of troops was bombarded by various enemy artillery and was beaten back before it reached the position. It suffered nearly half of the casualties, leaving the Bulgarians no one dared to launch an attack the next day. Some people may ask, since the Ottoman artillery is so fierce, where are the Allied artillery? Thanks to the mountainous terrain, although the number of coalition artillery far exceeds that of the Ottomans, the chance that the artillery entering mountain operations can exert its full strength is very slim. Because the weight of current artillery is not very light, which also makes it inconvenient to move. In mountainous operations, faced with various artillery placed in bunkers by the defenders, coalition artillery is needed to be mobile at any time. The heavy artillery of the coalition is even less likely to enter the mountainous areas, and can only be composed of light artillery, which greatly reduces its strike intensity. Therefore, when the enemy occupies the terrain advantage and the artillery cannot suppress the opponent, the frontline officers and soldiers cannot exert their combat effectiveness. At present, we can only slowly wear down the enemy, and at the same time wear down ourselves. Admiral Cardona waited until Simone finished speaking before speaking. "This is what I thought. It is difficult to defeat the enemy quickly with the current method alone. So if we want to defeat the defenders as soon as possible, we must find another way." After hearing what Admiral Cardona said, Simone still didn't know the purpose of looking for him this time. "Chief of General Staff, if you have any idea, just give the order. Don't worry, I came to you just because I need you to be this sharp knife and tear open the enemy's defense line." Speaking of this, Admiral Cardona asked, after thinking for a while, "How many troops do you currently have in your third army?" "Currently, my third army still has 32,000 combat effectiveness." Hearing Simeon's answer, General Cardona couldn't help but frown, because this force was a bit small. You must know that the third army has 42,000 people at full strength. However, considering that the third army had fought before after several fierce battles, it is reasonable to think that the loss of troops will be relatively large. Thinking of this, Admiral Cardona then said, "I will have the 3rd Mountain Brigade move with your 3rd Army under your command." Having said this, after looking at the other party, Cardona picked up the baton and talked about the next tasks Simeon needs to do. "After your 3rd Army has merged with the 3rd Mountain Brigade, you will use the cover of night to assemble towards Cumanovo, east of Skopje, where the Bulgarian army is located. After you are in place, I will launch the assault before you launch. Let all the ministries increase their offensive and hold the enemy back. Then as a surprise force, you and the Bulgarians quickly break through the enemy's defense line in the east together with the Bulgarians. Then after breaking through the enemy's position, you continue to approach the city of Skopje. If you have a chance, take it, go down to the city. The main difficulty of this operation is concealment. I will drive away the locals along the way before you start, and then you will have to rely on yourself. Are there any problems? No problem, but I have a small request. Faced with Simone's words, Admiral Cardona asked, if you have any requests, you can make them now. I need ammunition for at least 7 days of fighting. At this point, Simeon explained, the main purpose is to increase the firepower output, and also to prevent possible accidents. No problem. I'll have the logistics department prepare the ammunition you need. Are there any other questions? There is none left. In fact, after Admiral Cardona stated the plan, Simone thought about it carefully. He also knew that the first condition for the operation was concealment, and after hearing Admiral Cardona's preparations for him in advance, while working, he thought the battle could be fought. Then the two discussed for nearly 2 hours, mainly about the details of the plan and the deployment of troops. In addition, the march route was also within the scope of discussion. When Simeon finally walked out of the general's office, he immediately boarded the waiting carriage and rushed back to the 3rd Army headquarters overnight. According to the plan he discussed with the general, the 3rd Army and the 3rd Mountain Brigade needed to launch an offensive early in the morning the day after tomorrow. The time was tight and the tasks were heavy, so he naturally had no choice but to keep going. I don't know why, but the follow-up thoughts of the small warlord in the anti-Japanese war always come to my mind. I will resume the chapters tomorrow, as I said. Chapter 252, landing on the Asia Minor Peninsula. When General Cardona and Simeon were the defenders of Skopje, they planned to make a surprise move. A fleet appears off the coast of Izmir. With the appearance of this fleet, the Italian fleet, which was invincible in this war, also appeared in front of the local residents. The local residents of this city, which is said to be the birthplace of Homer, were not at all like the legendary poet who stayed to witness it with their own eyes. They all rushed out of the city with their families facing the wave of escapes in Izmir. The fleet commander Lieutenant General Yagia, who led the escort and fire support, put down the telescope in his hand and said, order the fleet to launch a bombardment in half an hour, and tell Lord Grove the news. Let us give those innocent civilians some time to escape. The residents of this place should be grateful for the Lieutenant General's mercy. Rear Admiral Hilmer, Chief of Staff of the fleet, standing next to him, praised the commander's kindness. Standing next to them, Lieutenant Colonel Leifer, the captain of the flagship, looked at the two people in front of him speechlessly. Half an hour is the time the fleet needs to prepare before the bombardment, and how many people can leave a city in half an hour? If it is truly a mercy, then it should be given 2 hours to show initial results. However, he could only keep these words in his heart. The Ottomans in the city had nothing to do with him, and he had no need to contradict his superiors for this. The two fleet commanders did not know what Leifer was thinking behind them. However, the messengers were running very fast. After all, there was no radio in this era, and semaphores, signal lights, etc. were needed to send messages. While the Italian fleet was still preparing, the officers and soldiers of the Ottoman 79th Division, which served as the defense force of Izmir city, were also in a panic. The division was formed less than 2 months ago, but it was insufficiently equipped and had not even completed basic training. Otherwise, it would not have been their turn to defend the place, and they would have been dragged to the front line in Adrianople facing the unexpected Italian fleet. Major General Hartmut, as the division commander and the supreme commander of the garrison, felt heavy pressure. Standing on the watchtower with the best position, he looked at the tall and mighty Italian warships outside the harbor and anxiously asked the chief of staff beside him, is the coastal defense fort ready? Not yet. Hearing this answer, Hartmut put down his telescope and asked in surprise, why aren't you ready? What's going on? Faced with Hartmut's question, the chief of staff answered, because the commander of the coastal defense battery, Lieutenant Colonel Hartmut, took away the key to the ammunition depot. The soldiers of the coastal defense battery have not been able to receive ammunition. Hearing the chief of staff's answer, Hartmut looked surprised. Could there be anything more ridiculous than this? Then go find this damn lieutenant colonel quickly. The arms and ammunition depot is extremely strong due to its special characteristics. Without the key, it would take half a day to open it. As for using other tools or methods, you can imagine the pressure. If there are flammable and explosive ammunition behind the door, we have sent people to look for him. Some officers and soldiers saw Lieutenant Colonel Hartmut leaving with 2 girls last night. Hearing this, Hartmut felt furious. If Lieutenant Colonel Hartmut appeared in front of him now, he would definitely pull out his pistol and kill him on the spot. I really regret that I couldn't tell this guy to get out because of his uncle's relationship as the mayor of the city. Now the retribution is on me. Although it is hard to say how useful ISMA's coastal defense forts will be, if the Italians knew that they lacked coastal defense deterrence, the consequences would be disastrous. While the local defenders were searching for the lieutenant colonel throughout the city, the Italian fleet outside the harbor finally made a new move. It was led by 3 Turin-class battleships, and the other 4 Duo and its improved classes rushed into the harbor. Upon entering, they immediately focused on the coastal defense fort that posed the greatest threat to them. 8,000 meters, 6,000 meters, 5,000 meters. As the observers continued to report the distance between the two, when they reached a distance of 5,000 meters, Lieutenant General Yagi, the commander of the fleet, felt strange. In fact, it was not only him who felt strange, but other officers and soldiers of the fleet also felt strange. Why did the enemy know fire was fired? Although according to the intelligence, the city's coastal defense artillery was not enough to cause fatal damage to several battleships, they were all within its effective range and there should not be no response point. Although some did not understand why the enemy fort did not fire, Lieutenant General Yagi thought this was an opportunity. Open fire. If the enemy doesn't fight back, get as close as 3,000 meters away and bombard them. Following his order, the artillery fleet, composed entirely of battleships of more than 10,000 tons, bombarded the forts one after another. Boom. Boom boom. The power of large caliber naval guns was vividly demonstrated in the bombardment. Each shell blasted a huge crater around the coastal defense fort. Let alone being hit. Even if it was not affected, it would be fatal or injured. However, even if the fleet bombarded them like this, the enemy fort still did not respond. Although the officers and soldiers of the fleet did not know what was going on at this time, it was obvious that they still understood the principle of taking advantage of someone's illness to kill someone. So the fleet then approached the fort while bombarding point. When they entered a distance of 3,000 meters, the accuracy of the fleet's bombardment was greatly improved. Several shells landed on the fort and exploded. Keep bombarding, don't stop. Lieutenant General Yagi, who saw such a scene, would not let go of the opportunity. He wanted to completely destroy the enemy's fort. As long as the enemy does not have the cover of coastal defense batteries, it will be easy to capture the city of Izmir. An enemy is approaching the fort, bearing 54.12. While the bombardment continued, sharp-eyed lookouts observed a group of enemies rushing towards the fort, and they were pushing something. But no matter what they were pushing, now that they were discovered, there was only one outcome. Soon the 2 battleships turned their guns and launched a bombardment at the enemy force that dared to rush towards the fort now. Boom boom boom. After the sound of several shells exploding, a louder boom sounded. Now everyone knew what they were doing, but the result was very fatal to them at the time. After watching from a distance that all the death squads he sent were wiped out, Major General Hartmut angrily waved his hand and smashed the wall hard. At this time, it is no longer possible to send death squads, and the next issue that needs to be considered is not just defending the city. This was all the result of Lieutenant Colonel Hartmut. Thinking of this, Major General Hartmut said bitterly, if Lieutenant Colonel Hartmut reinforces the fort, he will either live and die with the fort, or be shot for desertion. Let him choose. It was obvious that at this time, Major General Hartmut did not care about anything else. The little Lieutenant Colonel Hartmut simply could not bear the responsibility of Izmir. I'm sorry, Mantou broke his promise. I'm guilty. I'll make it up tomorrow. Chapter 253. The Macedonian army is destroyed. When Italy launched a landing war in Izmir, the war in the Balkans was still continuing. In Adrianople, squads of re-energized soldiers rushed towards the Bulgarian positions. The Bulgarian troops guarding the position were desperately fighting back. The rifles and positional artillery in his hands formed a road full of bullets. Any Ottoman officers and soldiers who stepped into it were in great danger of life. This was clearly verified by the corpses that continued to fall along the way. Of course, it was not only the attacking Ottomans who suffered harm, but the defensive Bulgarians also suffered from this serious crime. In and around the trenches, many people died wearing Bulgarian military uniforms. The battle between the two sides around Adrianople continued like this as the commanders of both parties, I naturally pay special attention to them. In a position that had just repelled the attack of the Ottoman army, the defenders and soldiers looked at the retreating Ottomans and cheered as if they were surviving the disaster. Major General Gudchev, the former commander of the Bulgarian First Army and now the commander of the Thrace Army, who was observing the battle situation from behind the position, looked at the officers and soldiers on the position and looked at the former commander of the Second Army behind him, now the commander of the Thrace Army. Major General Gudchev, deputy commander of the group army, said, "Such a battle will cause too many casualties to us, and we urgently need the support of our allies." Facing Gudchev's words, Gudchev, as the deputy commander, nodded and answered, "Yes, the Ottomans on the opposite side were simply crazy. They kept launching attacks, even if they suffered huge casualties. In just 1 week, the casualties were definitely not less than 80,000 people. Of course, his subtext is that, if the enemy suffers such heavy casualties, then they are also not small. Yes, the current number of casualties in Bulgaria has reached more than 40,000. This number does not seem to be much, but the base of the Bulgarian army is even smaller, only 170,000, which is a quarter of the casualties in a modern army. With such high casualties, it is already very good to still be able to ensure that the defense line is not breached. Of course, the Ottomans were also good here, with casualties reaching about a quarter. However, compared to the Bulgarians, the Ottomans have another advantage, and that is the continuous flow of reinforcement coming from Asia. The reason why the two sides still did not give in with so many casualties was also due to the battle in Skopje. Bulgaria wanted to wait for Italian reinforcement, while the Ottomans wanted to break the Bulgarian interception and rescue the defenders of Skopje. Since both parties want to achieve their goals, they can only compete in Adrianople to see who can complete their mission. Of course, they are also paying attention to the battle in Skopje. However, the two parties do not yet know that a huge change has occurred in Skopje, which they are concerned about, and the coalition forces have entered the city. 2 days ago, the Mobile Corps, with the Italian Third Army as the main force, suddenly appeared on the battlefield east of Skopje, where the Bulgarian army was the main force. The appearance of a 40,000 strong heavy regiment brought the power imbalance on the battlefield to its limit, so the Ottoman defenders who were caught off guard naturally lost their position. If this was the case, it would be good. The coalition forces, which were not yet easy to achieve a breakthrough, did not miss this rare opportunity. They almost drove the retreating Ottoman defenders all the way west, forcing them directly to the city of Skopje. If General Yilmaz, the Macedonian commander, had not gathered all the available troops in Skopje, the city might have been captured overnight. There is no way to mobilize the troops who have retreated and stationed on various lines of defense, and they can only do their best to squeeze the existing mobile forces in their hands. However, although the Eastern Coalition with the Third Army as the main force has not yet been able to capture Skopje, strategically and tactically, Italy has determined the overall situation on the Macedonian battlefield. Faced with the threat from the enemy in Skopje, the only stronghold and base camp behind them, the morale of the defenders in the other 3 directions was immediately unstable. The coalition forces took this opportunity and launched a fierce attack, which greatly confused their morale. The morale of the military is in chaos, which is very fatal on the battlefield, because the soldiers' minds are no longer just focused on the battlefield, which naturally greatly reduces the intensity of their resistance. And this +1- accelerated the war in Skopje. In just 2 days, the coalition forces successively broke through Ottoman peripheral positions in 3 other directions, and also arrived in Skopje. In these 2 days, the Ottoman army's casualties, prisoners and other figures have far exceeded the results of the previous 10 days of fighting. Now there are less than 90,000 Ottoman defenders able to return to Skopje, and their morale, weapons, and equipment are much worse than before. Naturally, the coalition's momentum also increased, and some even shouted that they would resolve the battle in Skopje within 3 days, and then rush to Thrace to seize Istanbul. Faced with such a situation, the Ottoman officers and soldiers trapped in the city had to make every consideration for themselves. The general headquarters of the Macedonian army located in Skopje was filled with gloom and gloom. The generals present looked at an Italian officer who appeared in the headquarters with a sad expression, and heard him say something loudly. Yes, this Italian officer was not captured by them, but came over from the enemy's position outside the city half an hour ago. As for what he was talking about, just look at the grim-faced Ottoman generals around, and you will know that it must be about peace talks. Or undisguised surrender would be more appropriate. Everyone, I have finished my words. I hope you can carefully consider our opinions. The Italian officer, who had just read out his conditions, looked at the defeated General Yilmaz, and said this: the result of the peace talks he announced before was that the Ottoman army laid down its arms and the coalition forces guaranteed the safety of their lives and legal property. Yes, the security of legal property. In other words, the property collected will be confiscated by the coalition forces, which is why they are so sad. As an Ottoman general, anyone who wants to live on just that salary will be laughed at by his colleagues. So these generals and even school officials are all wealthy people. But now, no matter how rich they are, they will be severely punished by the coalition forces, who made them live and die, blocked the pace of the coalition forces, and delayed the pace of the coalition forces. After seeing off the Italian officer who announced the conditions, General Yilmaz, the commander of the Macedonian army, looked at his frowning subordinates, and could only raise his head and said, "Everyone has heard the Italians' conditions just now. This time we are defeated. Don't worry about those things that should be given up." Among these people, Admiral Yilmaz is the richest, but with the defeat, everything needs to be put aside. As long as the military power remains in the future, the losses will be recovered sooner or later. As for why they don't continue to fight, they have lost more than half of their troops this time. How can they fight? Do they really think that the Ottoman officers and soldiers are beasts without temper? They were already worthy of the Ottoman Empire. Besides, this is not the Far East. If you don't care, you would rather die in battle than surrender. Following his words, the people present were basically silent. Although they did not agree, they did not object, which represented acquiescence. Once these generals are taken care of, the next thing will be easier to handle. The middle and lower level officers and soldiers have long been unwilling to fight. Now with the loss of weapons, ammunition, and personnel, they can no longer hold weapons. With General Yilmaz announcing his surrender, people were finally able to sleep peacefully. They no longer have to worry about being shot by sudden gunfire, and no one can make them rush into the enemy's hail of bullets. Everything is safe. On the coalition side, with the surrender of General Yilmaz, the fighting in Macedonia has ended. The officers and soldiers cheered. This battle was too difficult. In this battle, both sides invested nearly 500,000 troops, which ended with the complete annihilation of the Ottoman army. In this battle, the losses of the coalition forces were not small. In addition to the losses of weapons, ammunition and other materials, in terms of personnel, at present, the losses of the coalition forces are as high as 50,000, of which the Italian army, which is the main force, has lost more than 40,000 people, of which 11,000 were killed and missing, and 29,000 were injured. Such casualties are not small at all. Both Italians and Montenegrins believed that this battle was the most rare battle of the war, but the Bulgarians did not think so, because the battle in Adrianople continued. Chapter 254 Battle of Adrianople, Part 1. With Skopje occupied by the coalition forces, it was the turn of the Ottoman domestic army, led by Hamid Riza, who was fighting fiercely against the Bulgarians. News of the destruction of the Macedonian army came out soon after. Although the coalition tried to temporarily block the news, on the third day, the Al-Shabaab leader who served as Minister of War in Adrianople still received the news. Faced with the destruction of the Macedonian army group he was trying to rescue, Riza, as Minister of War, was mentally prepared, but when the news came, he still found it difficult to accept. What is Yilmaz doing? He didn't even last a month. Within his headquarters in Adrianople, Riza showed unusual dissatisfaction. Although he had thought that the Macedonian army would be annihilated by the enemy, he did not expect it to be so fast. And Riza, who was on the side, looked at the annoyed Riza and couldn't help but say, "Do we need to give up the attack and prepare for the next battle?" Facing Lisa's words, Riza knew what he meant. The Bulgarians could not attack for a long time. When the Italian army arrived to solve the Macedonian army, it would be even harder for them to fight. Not to mention that in Asia Minor, there were landing Italian troops. To contain their reinforcement, Lieutenant General Grove led the Guards and the 1st and 2nd Marine Divisions. After nearly 30,000 people landed in Izmir, they continued to advance inland. Although the Ottomans still had many troops in the Asia Minor Peninsula, however, the combat effectiveness of these second-line troops left behind was worrying, and they were beaten back steadily. They retreated to Akhisar before they could withstand the offensive. However, although he blocked the Italians, Osman mobilized nearly 100,000 people to stop the Italians. Although there are many people in public, the two are not the same in terms of combat effectiveness. One side is basically new soldiers, and the other side is an elite soldier. How can this be the same? Of course, due to the number of people, Lieutenant General Grove's diversionary force did not dare to go too deep. After reaching the point where part of the Ottoman forces were contained, they died down. However, this also resulted in Adrianople having basically no reinforcement in the past 10 days, which helped the Bulgarians contain the enemy. Therefore, Lisa's words basically represent the current mainstream thinking in the Ottoman army. If you cannot attack the enemy for a long time, you need to prepare for the worst. Riza knew very well what Lisa said, but he was unwilling to give up like this. The more important thing is that, if they give up like this, then their Al-Shabaab will lose the opportunity to dominate the Ottomans. Besides, if we just give up the attack like this, can we really retreat? Lisa, do you think we can stop the Italian and Bulgarian coalition? Faced with Riza's question, Riza thought for a while and answered, "Fighting in the wild is definitely not possible. If we rely on terrain advantages, then we still have a chance." Lisa said it very tactfully. Although he didn't want to admit it, if he relied on Adrianople, he could still withstand the enemy's offensive. This was just his answer, and Riza was very dissatisfied. What is the terrain advantage you are talking about, and what is it based on? In response to Riza's careful inquiry, Riza told the truth. If we stick to Adrianople or Istanbul, relying on its fortifications and blocking the supply channels for personnel, we have a 80% chance of blocking the enemy. Hearing Riza's words, Riza felt the same, as if he hadn't said anything. Using the capital Istanbul as a fortress, even if they win, they will be abandoned by the people. Because it was the most elite area of the Ottoman Empire, hundreds of years of foundation would be destroyed under the flames of war. As for Adrianople, Riza would not consider it. If there were only Bulgarians, then he would consider defending this last fortress city before facing the capital. However, now that the enemy has a huge maritime advantage, the role of Adrianople will be greatly reduced. Moreover, Adrianople also has a shortcoming, that is, after being blocked on all sides, the enemy may bypass the city and continue to attack Istanbul. If the troops in his hands were elite Ottomans, the enemy would not dare to do so, but the troops in his hands were mixed, and they were mainly new recruits. You can still perform well in a defensive battle, but it's a bit difficult to attack. Otherwise, he would be unable to break through the enemy despite his superior strength and firepower. Thinking about this, an idea came to Riza's mind. He turned to Lisa, who was waiting behind him, and said, "We still have some time at the moment. Next, let the troops launch a strong attack. We will press the entire army. If there is no progress within 4 days, then prepare for a defensive battle, based on the time when the Macedonian army was destroyed. Riza estimated that it would take at least 10 days for the enemy to arrive. After all, it took him at least 500 kilometers to get from Skopje to Adrianople, so 10 days was already very impressive for him. After deducting the 3 days of delay in delivering the message on the road, there are still 7 days. And considering possible accidents and leaving enough preparation time, 4 days of attack time can still be considered. Riza's words made Lisa feel incredible, but after thinking about it carefully, he approved the decision. This means giving it a try. If they can defeat and severely damage the Bulgarians, then they will only have to face the Italians, and the situation will be much better. If you can't do that, at least hurt the Bulgarians, which will also reduce the pressure on them. As for the worst case scenario, Lisa didn't dare to think about it. But no matter what, we need to play a game first, before talking about it. War Minister Riz's order quickly spread to all ministries, and in order to prepare for this most powerful offensive, he completely liberalized the supply of ammunition. So in the afternoon, the originally declining offensive suddenly increased several times. The Ottomans bombarded the defending Bulgarian positions like artillery shells for free. The Ottoman officers and soldiers waiting to attack were ordered by the commander to attack the enemy's position before the shelling stopped, completely ignoring the possible accidental damage. The Bulgarians guarding the position immediately felt the difference in the enemy. They were risking their lives. The Bulgarians are naturally not afraid of risking their lives. The Bulgarian mountain people have been an excellent source of soldiers since ancient times, and this time for their own motherland, there is no reason to let the Ottomans compete. So a bloody battle far beyond the past began. Major General Gudchev, who was far behind the position, got the news immediately. Of course he knew what it was. Facing the fierce Ottoman offensive, he was not afraid at all, because their performance on the battlefield was related to the division of post-war interests, and he also had backup options. As long as he could hold off the enemy for 3 days, he would make a decisive move. Great merit. So an order was issued from his headquarters that every Bulgarian officer and soldier must defend to the letter. Anyone who crosses his headquarters will be punished as a deserter by the military police. Everyone knows the consequences of desertion on the battlefield. So the soldiers from both sides fought together again in an extremely bloody scene. Chapter 255 Battle of Adrianople, Part 2. The Maritsa River is a famous river that flows through Thrace. It originates from the Rila Mountains in Lower Bulgaria. The area where the river flows is the essence of Thrace and produces a large amount of fruits and vegetables. It is a prosperous place. When the Ottoman army, under the orders of its commander, War Minister Hamdriza, fought bloody battles against the Bulgarians, a panting force arrived at Katras, a short distance away from the Maritsa River. This is a small town with less than 1,000 people. Because it is located on a coastal transportation artery, it has developed well. This force is composed of the 14th Division of the Italian Army and the 6th Bulgarian Independent Brigade. The main reason why they are so out of breath is because they are tired. It was certainly not their intention to make them work so hard. This all comes from orders from above, requiring them to rush to the Maritsa River within the specified time, and this is basically the front line of the confrontation between the coalition forces and the Ottomans. Not far after crossing the river is the territory of the Ottomans. However, since the two sides are currently fighting fiercely in Adrianople, there are not many troops from both sides here. With their arrival, the coalition forces on the Maritsa River far exceeded their opponents, of course, allowing them to travel from Shtip on the outskirts of Skopje to Katras in such a short period of time was not without paying a price. In 4 days, they marched a distance of 460 kilometers, which can be said to be a high-intensity forced march. And being able to march more than 400 kilometers in 4 days is enough to make them proud. However, after becoming arrogant, Major General Brazo, the commander of the 14th Division, felt a headache, because when he set out, there were more than 13,000 people in the division. Currently, except for the artillery regiment and the logistics force, which were lagging behind, there were more than 3,000 people. In addition, less than 7,000 people have arrived at Katras, and nearly 3,000 people have gotten separated on the road, or failed to follow. In the same situation as him was the accompanying Bulgarian brigade, which was also seriously depleted. Major General Brazo, who arrived at Katras, saw that his men were seriously lagging behind. After discussing with the Bulgarian commander, he had no choice but to announce that he would rest here for a day. And his decision made the exhausted officers and soldiers cheer. No one could resist the temptation. After marching for so long. Of course, Major General Brazo did this, firstly, to make repairs, and secondly, to wait for the stragglers to catch up. Of course, this would also allow the subsequent logistics artillery to catch up point. Although one day is not enough for them to get here, it can at least bring them closer to the main force point. When Major General Brazzo arrived at Catras, he decided to take a day off. The large coalition forces transferred from Skopje rushing here along the coastal road point. After accepting the surrender of the Ottoman Macedonian army, General Cadorna, the commander of the coalition forces, ordered the coalition forces to prepare for departure that day. The next day, after collecting the ordnance of the Macedonian army and driving it to the prisoner of war camp, he left 3 divisions of troops to guard and monitor, and then led the large army to Adrianople day and night point. In fact, there are 2 roads from Macedonia to Adrianople. One is the coastal road, and the other is through Bulgaria, and along the Maritsa Valley point. Both routes have their own advantages. Since the coastal road is in a plain area, the road is faster in all aspects than the road through the mountains and hills of Bulgaria. Of course, in addition to the advantages, there are also disadvantages. That is, this is a newly occupied area, so the Ottomans will soon know their every move. The Bulgarian road has a great advantage in this regard point, but in the end, Admiral Cadorna still chose the coastal road. Although the enemy knew it quickly this time, what if the news didn't come as fast as them? Yes, General Cadorna intends to use the big feat of his army to suddenly appear in front of the enemy before he can react. To this end, he used some unconventional methods. That is, just like what the 14th Division did, he used a rapid march to appear in front of the enemy before they could react. Therefore, in this march, there is no need to bring any artillery with a caliber of more than 100mm, and in order to ensure speed, its transport carriages also mainly carry ammunition. Large quantities of food, grass and other supplies that move slowly can only be replenished from the places they pass by. In addition, each soldier needs to carry 200 rounds of ammunition for 5 days of rations, and then go into battle lightly. Not to mention, this method immediately increased the speed of the coalition officers and soldiers. In addition to the vanguard troops who needed speed, their large forces marched at an astonishing speed of nearly 60 kilometers per day, and the laggard officers and soldiers were controlled within 5%. At present, they have crossed the Salonika Peninsula and entered the coastal road. It is believed that they will reach the Maritsa River in less than 4 days. Of course, this alone was not enough. Before they set off, Admiral Cadorna asked the local garrison on the march route to immediately block the road tightly and stop anyone from passing. No matter where they were going, they must stop. In addition, all telegraph agencies in various places were closed, prohibiting any communication, except military orders. Although this method will make local people complain, and its effect will be greatly reduced for those who are familiar with the local terrain, at that time, it would still increase the difficulty for the enemy to send messages. After all, there was no wireless telegraph yet, and the fastest wired telegraph could not be sent. Then we can only rely on manpower, and with the blockade, the speed of message delivery has been greatly reduced. But in general, this method is not bad. Although the coalition's march on the coastal road is in full swing, it has not yet been passed to the Ottomans. At present, the Ottomans are still fighting with the Bulgarians in Adrianople, and the brutality of the fighting between the 2 sides is far beyond anyone's imagination. Attack. An Ottoman officer brandished his command sword and ordered his men to attack the enemy. The position in front of them had been plowed through by intensive artillery and was riddled with holes. This was all due to the Ottoman artillery. Considering that this was the last blow, the Ottomans released their ammunition. The dominant artillery has become the main method of the Ottoman army. Although the tactics are a bit old-fashioned and simple, the artillery bombardment and then the infantry occupation still has good results. Although the Ottomans had many new recruits, after these days of fighting, those who survived have gradually turned into veterans. Although the methods were a little simpler, they were still veterans. Therefore, in these 3 days, the Ottoman army achieved good results and captured several Bulgarian positions. At the same time, the hope of capturing the main Bulgarian position was greatly increased. This result gave the Ottoman side hope and gave Hamdriza, the commander, enough confidence. Why didn't I think of this kind of give and take style of play before? The Bulgarians had already been defeated. Now that he had a way, Riza certainly would not give up. He ordered his troops to continue the attack. He wanted to extend the fighting time and completely defeat the enemy. Following his order, the fighting scene never subsided in Adrianople, and the bloody battles between the officers and soldiers of the two sides could be seen everywhere. As the commander of the Bulgarian side, Major General Guchev is now numb to the casualty figures. Thousands of casualty reports every day cannot shake his heart at all. This is the coveted opportunity to obtain Greater Bulgaria, and it is worth the sacrifice, no matter how great it is. Next, we need to look at the performance of our allies. Bulgaria has paid too much for this. Chapter 256 Battle of Adrianople, Part 2. The fighting near Adrianople had been going on for 8 days. During these 8 days, the Ottoman army launched large-scale attacks one after another every time it looked like the Bulgarian position was about to collapse. It seems that, as long as one more attack is launched, it will collapse. However, when they actually attacked again, they discovered that the Bulgarians, who were as invincible as Quirinal, emerged from the trenches again, and among them, the Bulgarian 9th Division who was defending Peterborough was the most tenacious. Peterborough, where the division is stationed, is the middle point of the Bulgarian defense line. As long as the Ottomans take this place, the Bulgarian position will be divided into 2 parts. At that time, it will be up to the Ottomans themselves to decide whether to divide and outflank them, or defeat them one by one. Therefore, facing the important point of Peterborough, the Ottomans prepared 4 divisions of troops, took turns to fight against the 9th Division, and even launched a rare night battle. However, the 9th Division was not a vegetarian. Under the leadership of the division commander Colonel Oleg Zotiev, the division gritted its teeth and blocked the opponent's attack point, so the 2 armies were in Peterborough, and the fighting between the 2 sides never subsided. Wave after wave of soldiers were thrown into it, so that in the next 2 years, the plants here were much more lush than the surrounding ones. Prepare the bayonet. The Bulgarian commander guarding the position saw that the enemy was very close to the position, and immediately ordered the officers and soldiers to fix their bayonets. Following his order, the Bulgarian soldiers on the position pulled out their bayonets from their waists and stuck them on their guns, preparing to engage in close combat with the enemy, who was approaching the position point living up to their expectations. The Ottoman officers and soldiers who finally reached the position also shouted and rushed into the position, and the bloody hand-to-hand combat began. Hand-to-hand combat is no different from others. It is a test of the courage and skills of officers and soldiers, so it does not last long. In about a quarter of an hour, the 2 sides decided the winner as expected. The remaining 1/3 of the Ottoman officers and soldiers who invaded the position were driven out of the position. No way. The Ottomans are inferior to the Bulgarians, who are holding their position in every aspect. Whether it is in terms of courage, hand-to-hand combat skills and coordination, they are inferior to their opponents. The Ottomans who invaded the position did not occupy the number. He has an absolute advantage, so losing is considered normal. However, although the Ottomans lost, Hamdriza and others who observed the battlefield situation from a distance were very satisfied. He saw through the telescope that after hand-to-hand fighting, only half of the Bulgarians were still standing on the battlefield. Well done, Major General Fana. Faced with Riza's praise, the commander of the Ottoman 41st Division did not dare to accept it. This is all because Your Excellency personally visited the front line and made the officers and soldiers break out of the spirit of risking their lives and fighting hard. But it is a pity that it was still a little short of it, otherwise the enemy would be the one who retreated. Major General Fana's humble words satisfied everyone present. This Major General Fana is capable, which can be seen from the combat effectiveness of his officers and soldiers. It is very good to know that the 41st Division was established in less than 4 months. It is very good to achieve such results. Although the defenders of the position were too exhausted after continuous fighting, they were able to attack the position and still showed their ability. No, Sabahaddin, Riza's right-hand man, defended him. Major General Fana, you don't need to be modest. You have already fought very well. As long as we attack a few more times, it will not be difficult for the position to change hands. While the Ottoman commander was commenting on the enemy, a young officer rushed over with an anxious look on his face. The sharp-eyed Sabahaddin immediately recognized the person who came. This was Major Dorji from the headquarters. He was mainly responsible for the communication issues of the headquarters. I saw Major George trotting all the way to Riza and whispering something in his ear. Although I don't know what he said, Riza's expression was good at the beginning, but it immediately turned not so good. How many people know this news? It's just me and the dispatcher at the moment. When other people saw such a scene, they were naturally very curious. But Riza didn't give them a chance to ask questions, so he immediately spoke. Let's go back first. Following Riza's words, only Major General Fanner and his officers were left in the 41st Division headquarters. What makes Riza so eager to go back is that the enemy's position will be broken through in just a few days. After returning to the headquarters in Fort Andrea, Riza sent everyone else away except Sabahaddin, and then asked Major Dorji to report again. However, compared with Riza, Sabahaddin is not enough. What? Lulburgat was taken by someone. Who was it? No wonder Sabahaddin would be surprised, because the city's location is too important. It is at the midway point between Andriesburg and Istanbul. The main road from Istanbul to Andriesburg must pass through here. Faced with Sabahaddin's surprised question, Major Dorji truthfully told the details. The defenders of Lulaburgak were attacked by an Italian division at 8 o'clock this morning. A regiment of defenders stationed in the city resisted, but at 11:19, the defenders of the city we sent out news that the city was about to be captured, but then we received no more news from it. In addition, our telegrams with Istanbul were also cut off, and I think the enemy has occupied the city. After Major Dorj finished his report, Riza spoke. Didn't the defenders send any troops from the enemy division? Faced with Riza's inquiry, Major Dorj shook his head. There is no telegram in this regard. It is very likely that the division and the others have not investigated clearly yet, and by the time they do, it will be too late to send a report. Riza and Sabahaddin then continued to ask several questions about the occupation of Lulburgats, and Major Dorji gave truthful answers one by one. Okay, you go out first. Don't tell anyone else this news. Riza, who had finished asking, sent Major Dorji away first, as you command, Your Excellency. After Major Dorj left, Riza's face suddenly fell. Sabahaddin, do you think the Italians have arrived and are preparing to encircle us? Facing the inquiry from the party leader and Al-Shabaab hope, Sabahaddin realized that this person did not know much about the military. But since I have asked myself, I need to give an answer anyway. Your Excellency, it seems that the Italians must have arrived, so we need to prepare to retreat quickly. This battle is no longer possible. It is best for us to retreat to the vicinity of Istanbul and rely on the capital's fortifications to confront the enemy. But I'm just quitting now. Doesn't it feel like it's too late? In Hasaf, less than 35 kilometers away from Adrianople, the coalition troops coming along the Maritsa River can already feel the breath of the oceans. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 257 Armistice. The news that the Ottoman army was surrounded by the coalition forces in Adrianople spread around the world 3 days later. As the current event that all countries are most concerned about, the news of the war between Italy and the Ottomans is always not spread at the first time point. So after the siege of Adrianople, the news spread immediately. Faced with the encirclement of the main force, the Ottomans certainly did not want to see it. Before this, their army had also had the idea of breaking out of the encirclement. Troops urgently dispatched from the besieged Adrianople and Istanbul launched a counterattack against Lulaburgak in an attempt to break the siege. However, in the end the city was still firmly in the hands of the Italians. It was announced that the Ottomans had failed to relieve the siege point, of course, as the troops are not fully in place. The Ottomans, who are currently surrounded, can still use the gaps to withdraw a small number of troops. But don't even think about the large troops. It is impossible to withdraw point among them. Many senior Ottoman officers who were concerned about the safety of Istanbul took advantage of this time to reserve their services for the future. However, as the commander, Riza did not evacuate point. Instead, he stayed in the besieged Adrianople, frequently showing up to cheer up the troops. To maintain the plummeting morale among the troops, as many officers secretly left. Frequent meetings with officers and soldiers increased Riz's influence in the army. However, despite this, they were destined to be surrounded in this last fortress of Istanbul. During this period, Riza had countless opportunities to leave, but he refused them all. He knew very well that if he left, the more than 200,000 Ottoman troops in Adrianople would be finished. The capital, Istanbul, could not stop the Italian-Bulgarian offensive at all, and he could not leave for the sake of Ottoman. In some respects, Riza, as the leader of al-Shabaab, is worthy of being a qualified patriot. However, although Riza's patriotic enthusiasm has not diminished at all, it still cannot change the current situation of the war. After the news of the siege of Adrianople came out, the world in Istanbul was in chaos, and all kinds of gossip and rumors about the coalition forces were flying everywhere. Some said that the troops in Adrianople had surrendered, some said that the troops had withdrawn, and still others said that the enemy was approaching Istanbul. These random news caused panic in the city of Istanbul, and many people fled to the Asia Minor Peninsula with their families by boat. Faced with such a scene, the troops stationed in Istanbul did not stop them at all. Unlike the citizens, they knew more precise information, and knew that the coalition forces now need to prioritize the troops in Adrianople. So Istanbul is still safe for now. However, although it is still safe now, after the enemy solves Adrianople, Istanbul will not have enough power to resist the opponent, because all the troops that the Ottomans can mobilize have been eliminated by the enemy. In addition to the more than 40,000 troops in Istanbul, the Ottomans only have more than 80,000 troops facing off against the Italian landing troops near Izmir. The Ottoman Empire, which currently has no troops available, has few options to make when the enemy is about to approach the city. At this time, it is normal for some changes to occur among the Ottoman senior officials. On the evening of the next day after the news of the siege of Adrianople came back, a mutiny broke out in Istanbul. The Ottoman army, still loyal to the Sultan, under the leadership of the former Minister of War Osman Nuri Pasha, would stay in Istanbul. The al-Shabaab forces were wiped out, and a large group of al-Shabaab members, including Amr Issa, were imprisoned. Although no fierce fighting broke out that night, it still made people in Istanbul panic. The curfew that night made the people of the Ottoman capital feel an unusual atmosphere. In the early morning of the next day, after the dust had settled, Ottoman Sultan Ahmed II once again took over the power, and the Ottoman political forces immediately welcomed the Sultan, as if the al-Shabaab forces had never appeared before, and brought him to power. Forget about it. The first thing Sultan Ahmed II did, after returning to power, was to remove Grand Vizier Jawad Pasha, who was promoted by al-Shabaab. In addition, basically all the officials who took office after al-Shabaab came to power were dismissed this time. In the sequence of dismissals, they were replaced by officials headed by Said Pasha, who was known for his stability and state control. They took over the newly vacated positions and continued to ensure the production and operation of the Ottoman center. Of course, except for Osman Nuri Pasha, the most critical position of Minister of War is currently beyond his control. The first thing that the newly appointed Ottoman senior officials need to do is to end the state of war with the coalition forces. Your Majesty, this is the armistice agreement we have drafted. Please take a look at it. In the palace, the newly appointed Grand Vizier Said Pasha presented the urgently negotiated conditions to Sultan Ahmed II. When the enemy was about to approach the city, an armistice agreement was presented at this time, and the conditions were as you can imagine. In this agreement, Osman fully agreed with the previously negotiated conditions. Of course, it is still difficult to gain the approval of the coalition, based on this alone. After all, this fight lasted for a while longer, and the result was even more unfavorable to the Ottoman side. Therefore, in addition to agreeing with the results of the previous negotiations, the Ottomans also added a clause. In view of the current war situation, the two parties ceased fire on the spot and waited for the results of the peace talks to be negotiated by the two parties. Coordinate again. Obviously this clause is aimed at Adrianople and Istanbul. In order to prevent these two places from falling into the hands of the coalition forces, the conditions were written in advance. Ahmed II asked, after reading the urgently drafted armistice agreement, "What is the attitude of other countries?" Said Pasha knew what the Sultan meant by asking this question, and he answered immediately. At present, the ambassadors of Britain, France, Germany, Austria, and Russia have expressed to our country their desire to end this war. For this reason, I think our country's armistice agreement is also what all countries want to see. There is nothing wrong with what said Pasha said. The European powers wanted this war to end immediately. The reason is very simple. The Ottomans performed too poorly in this war. Everyone can see that this war has pulled the Ottomans out of their pants. At present, the main task of the Ottomans is to end this war as soon as possible. The next step is to learn lessons or lick their wounds and restore their strength. In their view, the previous outbreak of al-Shabaab was just a concentrated expression of the patriotic enthusiasm of the Ottoman military and civilians, but the timing of its outbreak was so poor that it simply added salt to the wounds of their country. Now it is simply a dream for the Ottomans to return to normal. As for the mentality of the European powers, the Ottoman leaders can still guess something. After all, its location is too good and the Black Sea Strait is too important. Therefore, amid the expectations of the Ottoman high-level officials, the armistice agreement quickly reached the hands of Italy, Bulgaria, and Black. Faced with the armistice proposed by Ottoman, the three countries were naturally happy to see results. I'm wrong. Except for Bulgaria, all other participating countries are willing to see it. Although Bulgaria is jealous of Istanbul, which is just around the corner, they also know that this is not something they can point out at the moment. So after other countries expressed their stance, Bulgaria could only agree. Although all countries have agreed to an armistice, as the mainstay of this war, Italy has made a special request. That is, the location of this negotiation must be in Rome. Faced with Italy's request, the Ottomans agreed to it, in order to avoid long nights and dreams. After all, they currently have no confidence to oppose Italy's request. So negotiators from all parties rushed to Rome to prepare for the next negotiations. Chapter 258 Good news from Kosovo. Since the negotiations are scheduled to take place in Rome, Italy, as the host, needs to prepare in all aspects from the arrangement of the venue to the accommodation of all parties, as well as security and reception. Everything needs to be prepared in advance, and all needs to be prepared in a short period of time. This is not an easy task for the government, so cabinet members including the Prime Minister are busy, but among these cabinet members, Foreign Minister Bacona is the busiest. In addition to the government, the military and Carlo were also not forgotten, and were assigned various tasks. Among them, as King Carlo, he was responsible for receiving the visiting Grand Duke Nicholas of Montenegro, and King Ferdinand I of Bulgaria. These two kings and Grand Dukes helped Italy a lot in this war. Although Italy could not provide too many benefits to the two countries, the necessary courtesy was still necessary. Of course, this visit from Montenegro and Bulgaria also has its own purpose, not just that it is not easy to talk about it now. Just as Carlo was preparing for the upcoming arrival of the two monarchs, a telegram disrupted his arrangements. Is this news true? Carlo looked at the telegram in front of him, and asked the captain of the guard who brought the news in disbelief. Faced with Carlo's question, Felice thought for a while and answered, "This news should be correct. The military garrison in Kosovo has sent geological exploration personnel to conduct an investigation first. They said that coal seams have been discovered and are worthy of mining." Yes, what surprised Carlo was the news of coal mines brought from Kosovo, but the news was obtained in a somewhat unexpected way. It came from a prisoner of war camp. During the liberation of Kosovo by Italian forces, local Ottoman forces surrendered to them. Due to the war, these prisoners of war were held together. The local garrison tried to get some useful information from these prisoners of war. To this end, they prescribed cigarettes and coffee and other items that were popular among the prisoners of war, trying to induce them to reveal some hidden information. Among them was an Ottoman officer named Damir. After learning about Ottoman's peace proposal, he revealed the news to the garrison in exchange for a quite generous reward. He once protected a team of geologists conducting geological surveys in Kosovo, during which these geologists discovered that there were many coal seams in Trepča, and they concluded that there were coal mines here. Although he didn't know why there was no news later, Damia remembered their conversation, and then he informed the Italian garrison of the news with the attitude of giving it a try. After receiving this unknown news, the head of the local garrison hired several people who had studied geology to conduct an exploration of the area he was talking about. The results were very gratifying. After a period of exploration, they found many coal mines suitable for mining. In addition to coal mines, they also discovered lead zinc ores in the area, which was initially estimated to be in billions of tons. Among the coal mines discovered, they are mainly lignite, with a lot of anthracite. As for the reserves, domestic professionals need to be dispatched to estimate them, but they are not expected to be less than 500 million tons. Coal mines with this reserve are really good news for Italy, not to mention the discovery of lead and zinc ores, which are raw materials urgently needed by industry and minerals that Italy urgently needs. Italy lacks everything except population. The discovery of these minerals in newly occupied territories was very good news for Italian industry. After the garrison's investigation, the news traveled across the ocean and was presented to Carlo's desk. Faced with this good news, Carlo is of course willing to see it, and this also gives Italy more reasons to leave Kosovo to itself. Call the Prime Minister over. After putting down the telegram, Carlo decided to find the Prime Minister and inform him of the news. This is not because Carlo wants to spread the news, but because he wants to exploit these minerals and cannot do without the government. First, the government needs to organize manpower to conduct a survey of the area. Only after obtaining specific data on the mineral resources can it be reasonably exploited. Whether the mined minerals will be smelted locally or shipped out requires on-site inspection before a conclusion can be drawn. Of course, this can only be determined after ascertaining the actual reserves of each mine, but this does not dissuade Carlo from being in a good mood. Before he could wait long, Prime Minister Desperatus, who had been busy in the Prime Minister's office, appeared in front of him. "Your Majesty, what do you want from me?" Faced with the Prime Minister's inquiry, Carlo handed him the telegram from Kosovo. "Look at it, Prime Minister. This is fantastic news for our country." After hearing Carlo's words, Prime Minister Desperatus read the telegram at a glance, and his expression changed dramatically with the contents of the telegram, from dull to surprised in just a few seconds. "Your Majesty, is this news true?" It was exactly the same as Carlo's previous inquiry, except that the honorific Your Majesty was added. "This is from the garrison, and its credibility is very high." Although Carlo did not confirm directly, Desperatus still looked excited. "This is really good news for our country, so the Kosovo region must be in our hands." Looking at the Prime Minister in front of him, Carlo once again confirmed the requirements for this negotiation. That's right, Italy's original plan to punish the Ottomans for rekindling the war was to gain an additional territory from them. But before, I was a little hesitant whether to choose Kosovo or parts of Macedonia, and this telegram made him make up his mind. As for Kosovo, Macedonia should let several other countries fight for it. Don't think that Italy doesn't know the thoughts of the Balkan countries. They have been coveting Macedonia for more than a day or two. If Italy wants to take some of it, I'm afraid it won't have endless troubles. This is inconsistent with Italy's goal of not wanting to penetrate too far into the Balkans. Your Majesty, please rest assured, I know what to do. Faced with Carlo's words, Desperatus, as Prime Minister, still didn't understand. However, considering the upcoming peace talks between various countries, the news of the discovery of minerals in Kosovo is obviously not suitable for people to know at this time. So next, the government will secretly send geological professionals into Kosovo under other names. As for the local blockade news, this is very simple. A military exercise can evacuate the surrounding residents. Not to mention that the local Albanian people in Kosovo still believe in green Christianity, which is incompatible with the strong Catholicism in Italy. There are ways to deal with these people. Afterwards, the Prime Minister discussed with Carlo for a while and left with satisfaction. The next matter of secretly arranging people to explore is not a difficult task. For first of all, a week later, a team composed of geology departments from various Italian universities set off from Venice. Their purpose this time is to take students to Kosovo to conduct geological research on the Balkan Peninsula. However, Considering the dangers that Kosovo may encounter, major colleges have organized together, and there are soldiers protecting them along the way. This news is just in the corner of the newspaper. Who will pay attention to it? The major newspapers are currently paying the most attention to the upcoming Rome peace talks, which are full of news about big names. Chapter 259 Italian Provincial Alliance. During this period, it was a happy day for Italian journalists. They did not need to look for news, they only needed to keep an eye on the upcoming peace talks in Rome. When big names come to Rome, whether it's for food, accommodation or sightseeing, it's all news. It's best to say a few words of praise for Italy. That would be perfect. Unlike journalists, the Italian government, as a participant and organizer, is much busier. They are different from those who watch the excitement, and the reception work is even more difficult. Of course, Carlo, the king, also appeared in this. Just today, King Ferdinand I of Bulgaria came to Rome with the Bulgarian delegation. As the host, Carlo naturally needed to welcome him. At the welcome dinner in the palace, the guests of honor gathered together happily, and the Italian, and black parties gathered together happily. That's right, there is an additional Grand Duchy of Montenegro. At this dinner to welcome Bulgaria, the Grand Duchy of Montenegro, as a comrade in arms, also attended in costume. In fact, it is not difficult to guess. When the mortal enemy Ottoman is basically about to withdraw from Europe, Montenegro's hatred of Osman suddenly loses its target. At this time, Montenegro should consider its future. Maintaining good relations with Italy across the sea is naturally Montenegro's first choice. However, putting eggs in a basket does not meet actual needs, so Montenegro needs to have more considerations. Participating in the dinner to welcome Bulgarian allies this time was not nothing but a contact. After all, according to the needs of various countries this time, Montenegro and Bulgaria are not bordering, so there is no conflicting core interests. So at this dinner, you can see that the Prime Minister of the Grand Duchy of Montenegro, Peter Thiel, had a lively conversation with the Prime Minister of Bulgaria, Stambolov, and the Prime Minister of Italy, Despotis. Around the three of them, the other guests formed separate groups, talking in one social circle. Everything is so orderly and lively. However, the focus of this banquet is not on the three prime ministers, because at the core are the three monarchs. We were able to defeat the Ottomans this time thanks to your country's help. As a country that suffered the consequences, we will never forget this kindness. The one who was speaking was Nicholas I, the Grand Duke of Montenegro. This man did not have a strong presence in Europe because the Grand Duchy of Montenegro had been recognized by European countries for less than 20 years. It was only at the Berlin Conference in 1878 that Montenegro was considered a political country. Before that, it could only be regarded as a religious force. The Archduke's gratitude was sincere. If it weren't for Italy's help, Montenegro, a small country with a territory of only 8,000 square kilometers and a population of less than 150,000, would have almost doubled its territory and increased its population to more than 200,000. To put it in a simple and easy to understand way, it's not too much to say rebirth parents Carlo had heard enough words of thanks from the Grand Duke of Montenegro. Since the Grand Duke came to Rome, he had expressed his gratitude to Italy on various occasions. It was obvious that the Archduke understood the mentality of the Italians, and he came out with good words for free. And through the spread of newspapers, the Archduke Nicholas was very popular in Italy. It's just that you get tired of hearing good things too much, and that was the case with Carlo. But although Carlo was tired in his heart, he didn't show it at all on the surface. The Grand Duke is overly praised. After replying to Grand Duke Nicholas, Carlo brought the topic to the King of Bulgaria. Your Excellency Ferdinand, the journey has gone smoothly. Facing Carlo's question, Ferdinand I, who had been silent before, smiled and answered, "Thank you, Lord Carlo, for your concern. The journey went very smoothly." Having said this, Ferdinand I looked towards the three prime ministers along the gap and happened to meet the Prime Minister of Bulgaria. The Bulgarian Bismarck winked at the king, as if giving some hint. After receiving the response, Ferdinand I smiled slightly and continued, "Your Excellency Carlo, in fact, I would like to say it again what Grand Duke Nicholas said. Your country's help is the greatest contributor to our victory over the Ottomans this time. Therefore, everyone in our country believes that if we can maintain our current situation, this relationship is of great benefit to our three countries. Ferdinand's words actually represent the true thoughts of the Bulgarians. Although Bulgaria gained a lot from this war, its diplomatic environment was rapidly deteriorating. Needless to say, its relations with Greece and Serbia. As Bulgaria seized large areas of territory in Macedonia, the conflicts between the three countries quickly deepened. If Italy hadn't been watching, it would have been a high probability that the two countries would secretly form a defensive alliance. As for Bulgaria's original ally, Russia, relations between the two countries also deteriorated rapidly as Ferdinand became king. As for Ottoman, let alone this is considered a blood feud point. In addition, Austria-Hungary, another major power in the Balkans, has also become more subtle in its attitude towards Bulgaria. Although Ferdinand was born here, its current relationship with Bulgaria is not very good. In addition, Romania, another neighbor of Bulgaria, had relatively good relations before, but as Bulgaria seized large areas of territory, its attitude also became subtle. So looking at it, Bulgaria's diplomatic situation in the Balkans has never become so bad. In fact, the Bulgarians themselves know the reason. That is, as Bulgaria seized large tracts of Macedonian territory, its national power has been greatly enhanced, and it has been able to threaten the safety of Greece and Serbia. In addition, the Bulgarians have always been brave and good at fighting, and have performed well in recent wars. Excellent, which makes people even more worried. However, even if they knew the reason, the Bulgarians did not relent on the Macedonian territory. For them, giving up a small piece of territory was unacceptable. So the only way now is to find a strong ally, to suppress the evil neighbors with evil intentions around them. At present, there is no more suitable ally than Italy. It does not have much conflict of interest with Bulgaria, and its strong strength can prevent others from acting rashly. So this time the Bulgarians not only wanted to discuss the conditions for the defeat of the Ottomans, but also wanted to deepen relations with Italy. If nothing else, it would be even more perfect for Bulgaria if it could sign a 5-year military alliance treaty with Italy. Although Carlo didn't know the Bulgarians' intentions, he still understood the words of the Bulgarian king in front of him. However, it was difficult for him to accept what Ferdinand I said. Although Italy would benefit a lot from having multiple allies, if this ally is in the Balkans, it needs to think twice. The Balkan powder keg did not only take shape in the 20th century, the seeds were sown at the Berlin Conference in 1878. In the final analysis, the Ottoman power was sharply weakened, leaving a power vacuum in the Balkans. The external forces of Russia and Austria want to gain access to it, and local independent countries also want to take advantage of this opportunity. In addition, if factors such as nationalism are mixed in, it is already considered very good to be able to delay the war. So faced with the olive branch extended by Bulgaria, Carlo was worried, but considering the relationship between the two countries, it would definitely not work to refuse it like this. After thinking for a while, Carlo spoke. "Thank you for your attention to our country. Our country is very willing to maintain good relations with Bulgaria. However, this matter is of great importance, so it takes time to discuss." What? Carlo said as if he didn't say it. The whole article is just words of evasion. Facing Carlo's words, Ferdinand I knew in his heart that the results of this first trial were somewhat unsatisfactory. It doesn't matter. If you really want to reach an agreement, it won't be possible in less than 10 days and a half. Bulgaria has time, and can talk slowly with the Italians. Chapter 260 Rome Peace Talks, Part 1. Although the Bulgarians thought there was still time, with the arrival of the Ottoman delegation 2 days later they immediately ran out of time as peace talks in Rome officially began. Without giving the Ottomans time to rest, negotiations for war began at the Quirinal Palace the day after their arrival in Rome. It's just that the Ottomans are in a more difficult situation in this negotiation. Although there are still representatives from so many countries, compared with the London peace talks, not only the voice of Greece and Serbia has dropped sharply, but also the influence that other powerful countries can exert in this peace negotiation. Among them, it is also reduced a lot. All of this is due to the negative consequences of the Ottomans' previous refusal to sign the peace treaty. Now the Ottomans have to rely more on themselves. However, the results on the battlefield left the Ottomans very unsure. After the two negotiating parties sat down, Italian Foreign Minister Boccona came up with the conditions for defeating one party. Said Pasha, "These are our conditions, please take a look at them." As the negotiator of the Ottoman side, said Pasha, who had been mentally prepared after taking over as Grand Vizier, did not refute after hearing the words from the Italian Foreign Minister. Instead, he silently took over the document representing the conditions of the Italian side from the other party. Start reading. Point. This time Italy's conditions increased a lot. In addition to the original requirement to cede Albanian and Ottoman North African territories and ensure the independence of Crete, it also required the Ottomans to give up Kosovo and the 12 islands as punishment for prolonging the war before the Ottomans. After said Pasha read the Italian conditions, Popkov, as the Bulgarian foreign minister, came up with the Bulgarian conditions. "This is our country's requirement. Please take a look at it." Like the Italians, Bulgaria also added many conditions, the most critical of which was that Bulgaria strongly demanded that the entire Macedonian region be ceded to them as punishment for the Ottomans' previous overthrow of the London Contract. As for Greece and Serbia, the conditions for these two countries are the same as before, so there is no change. But then again, they were more or less involved in the previous wars. To put it shamelessly, they could be considered as contributing to the victory of the war. But this time in their rematch with Osman, they didn't even touch the hair. Even if they wanted to touch the porcelain, they didn't have the conditions, so they had no choice but to see this kind of price increase. Perhaps you have also discovered that in addition to Italy and Bulgaria, there is another country that has not put forward conditions. That's right, the Grand Duchy of Montenegro, which hates the Ottomans the most, is silent. This is unscientific. There is nothing unscientific. Montenegro has no border with the Ottomans. It is not easy to divide the territory. Considering this, Italy, as the big brother, reluctantly helps Montenegro to gain territory, and at most it will cut off a part of the neighboring Albanian region as compensation. In fact, Montenegro and Italy have already negotiated privately the 1,400 square kilometers of territory on Lake Skadar where Montenegro intersects with Albania will serve as a reward for the Grand Duchy of Montenegro in this war. Although this piece of land is small, Montenegro is very happy because most of its territory is mountainous, and the land around Skadar Lake is not a lot of grain producing land. This is not at all tempting to the Grand Duchy of Montenegro. Therefore, the dividends of the Grand Duchy of Montenegro's second war with the Ottomans came from Italy. Of course, Italy did not suffer. It gained more from the Ottomans. The Kosovo region and the 12 islands were enough to satisfy Italy. The only new terms added to the peace talks this time were Italy and Bulgaria, so the new Grand Vizier said Pasha, who was the head of the Ottoman negotiators, quickly read through. After reading the conditions of Italy and Bulgaria, said Pasha put down the documents and spoke. "We have seen your conditions and I have some questions about them." Having said this, said Pasha said again without waiting for others to ask, "I wonder what basis you base your request for the 12 islands and the Macedonian region on." Said Pasha's words seemed to be nonsense, but there were people who were proficient in diplomacy present, so how could they not understand the meaning of his words? This is asking what credentials they used to claim the territory. As for why he only asked about the 12 islands and Macedonia, this was also his strategy. The Ottomans lost even their underwear in this war, so they must lose some territory. Other areas were beyond the reach of the Ottomans. Only the 12 islands and Macedonia were extremely important to the Ottomans. The Dodeka Islands were able to directly threaten their core territory of Asia Minor, which was very important to the Ottomans. As for the Macedonian region, it was the Ottoman strategy. This war allowed the Ottomans to significantly return their power to Asia, which made the Ottomans very unwilling. In this case, it is natural to lay the necessary mines to create an opportunity for oneself to return. In this case, there is no better option than the Macedonia region. Everyone knew this was a hornet's nest, and the Ottomans wanted to make a fuss out of it, so this couldn't be better faced with said Pasha's question. Boccona and Popkov quickly gave an answer. "Our country is here to liberate the natives from your country." There is nothing wrong with what Boccona said. Although the Greek residents of the 12 islands may not be willing to do so, do their opinions matter? Greece doesn't even dare to mention it. They can't even do anything about Crete. As for the Ottomans, who made them lose so miserably. The Macedonian region has historically been our country's territory. In addition, most of the people in this area are from our country, so it should be included in our country, and this is also our unanimous request. When Popcov said this, he turned his attention to Italian allies, which was recognized by the Italian delegation headed by Italian Prime Minister Despotis. In some respects, Bulgaria's request is more reasonable than Italy's, but in diplomatic negotiations, reasonableness and legality cannot be the main basis now. As soon as Stamborov finished speaking, he immediately aroused opposition. I disagree with what Mr. Popkov said. There are also people from our country in Macedonia, and Macedonia has also been our country's territory in history. So according to your words, Macedonia should also belong to our country. The speaker was Greek Foreign Minister Mavros, and his words also attracted the approval of Serbian Foreign Minister Jeremic. Your Excellency Mavros is right. There are also people from our country in Macedonia, and it once belonged to our country in history. So according to your Excellency Popkov's words, this area should also have a share of our country. Faced with the obstruction of Serbia and Greece, this is also within the scope of Bulgaria's consideration. After all, the three countries all have ambitions for the Macedonian region, so who can not know about each other? Therefore, after hearing the objections of the two countries, Prime Minister Stambolov, who is the head of the Bulgarian negotiations, must stand up. You too may have forgotten that in this war, our country contributed more. The bloody battle of nearly 300,000 Bulgarian troops and the help of Italian and Montenegrin allies allowed the Macedonian people to escape the oppression of the Ottomans. What contributions did the two countries have a say on Macedonia? Although there were Ottomans present, the Bulgarian Bismarck did not consider the feelings of the Ottomans at all. In his words, the Ottoman side was not angry about this situation, because they knew who the Bulgarian Prime Minister was targeting. They were just accidentally implicated, and it was more of a competition between Bulgaria and Sechi. Next, look at the confrontation between the three countries, which will be more beneficial to Osman. And according to the Ottomans' understanding of the three countries, the two countries will never surrender to the Bulgarians on the Macedonian issue. Sure enough, even the naked threat of force from the Bulgarian Bismarck still did not make the two countries flinch. Greek Prime Minister Trikoupis said with a mocking look on his face, "Your Excellency Stambolov, do you think that your country's force alone can make us surrender? I'm afraid that I will disappoint your country. Greece's 3 million soldiers and civilians will never accept any oppression." Before Trikoupis, the Greek Prime Minister, could finish his words, Serbian Prime Minister Grujic on the side also said coldly, "The same goes for our country's 3 million soldiers and civilians, who will never accept any oppression." Seeing the sudden internal disputes over the Macedonian issue at the peace talks, Italian Prime Minister Despotis, as the host, stood up. "You 3. This is a peace negotiation with the Ottomans, not a negotiation on the Macedonian issue. If you want to talk about Macedonia, then I can open a separate conference room for the three of you." Despotis's words suppressed the atmosphere of the venue again. The three countries all need to give face to the Italian host, and these words gave the three people who had just gradually become like riding a tiger a step to step down. Now, let's get on with it. After glancing at the prime ministers of the three kingdoms of Basihi, Despotis turned to the real target. The Ottoman representative said, "Your Majesty," said Pasha, "what is your country's opinion on our conditions?" Chapter 261 Rome Peace Talks, Part 2. As the lights begin to light up in the evening, people who have been busy all day return home one after another to enjoy their daily rest. Of course, the coming of night is not only related to rest, especially the parties involved in this eye-opening peace talks are not qualified to rest at this time. They took advantage of the lull in negotiations to make adjustments to various situations that had arisen in previous negotiations in the Austro-Hungarian embassy. Ambassador Gavin Freddy, the Austro-Hungarian peace talks observer representative, returned to the embassy with a gloomy look on his face. "How are the peace talks going?" Von Spark, the counselor of the embassy, asked with concern about the progress of the peace talks. "To bat, a bunch of vicious dogs fighting over a bone, Ambassador," Freddy spoke of today's peace talks with a sense of malice. The peace talks in Rome looked really bad to him. This peace negotiation is very important to Austria-Hungary, but they cannot interfere too much in it. According to Count Gustav Karnacki, Minister of Foreign Affairs and Chairman of the Council of Ministers, this war is related to Austria-Hungary's interests in the Balkans, but the empire needs to consider alliance issues, and is restrained in exerting influence. It doesn't get much worse than this. The main reason for all this was the huge deviation in Austria-Hungary's estimation of Ottoman strength. In fact, it was not just Austria-Hungary. Before the outbreak of this war, the general view among European countries was that this would be an evenly matched war. Although the strength of the Ottomans is constantly weakening, the Italians are not too strong. The Ottomans still have the home field advantage, so this war can be fought. However, the course of the war was beyond everyone's expectations. The Ottomans were defeated. If it were not for the influence of various countries, Istanbul would be occupied by now. This situation makes Austria-Hungary, which has huge interests in the Balkans, very embarrassed. Watching Italy and Bulgaria seize large tracts of territory, and I can only turn the Serbian and Montenegro area under my jurisdiction into a direct jurisdiction. No matter how you look at it, you are at a loss. What's even more uncomfortable is that Italy is still its own ally, and it is impossible for Italy to do something that will give others a handle. In fact, it is not just Austria-Hungary that is embarrassed. Russia, which has the same interests as Austria-Hungary in the Balkans, is also very embarrassed. As a well-known Russia in the Balkans, I won't say much about its situation in this war. The fact that it can make such a crazy move to support the Ottomans with arms shows Russia's impatient heart. Fortunately, the coalition forces did not capture Istanbul, otherwise no one knows whether the Russians will go crazy, and maybe they will do something crazy like general mobilization. Ambassador Freddy was unconcerned about the Russians' actions. But even though he didn't care, he couldn't stop people from visiting. No, not long after Ambassador Freddy returned, someone from the embassy came to report that Russian Ambassador Alexander Tokayev was visiting. When Freddy heard that the Russian ambassador was visiting, he knew the purpose of the visit without even thinking about it. Although Russia and Austria-Hungary are rivals in the Balkans, it is not surprising that the two parties would join forces when their common interests may be threatened. And there is precedent for this. In the Serbia-Bulgaria war nearly 10 years ago, Austria-Hungary issued a warning to the victorious Bulgarians, asking them to stop fighting Serbia, otherwise Austria-Hungary would send troops for this purpose. Since the two countries have such a tacit understanding of confrontation and cooperation, there is no reason why they should not use it in this peace negotiation. So facing the visiting Russian ambassador, Freddy naturally invited him in his office. The tall and lanky Freddy looked at the fat and bear-like Tokayev. The obvious combination of lanky and short between the two became a classic match. "Hello, Ambassador Tokayev. Welcome to your visit." Facing Freddy's greeting, Tokayev waved his hand and did not respond seasonally. "Freddy, we need to work together this time." After despising the other party in his heart for not even observing diplomatic etiquette, Freddy took out a cigar and threw one to the other party and said, "Your Excellency, haven't we already joined forces for this peace negotiation meeting? I have promised to support Serbia." Tokayev took the cigar and took a puff, shaking his head. "This alone is not enough. Your country needs to exert your influence to make Italy abandon the Bulgarians." Tokayev leaned closer and whispered, "We have received news that this time Bulgaria has offered a lot of benefits in order to gain the full support of the Italians, including conditions for lowering tariffs." Speaking of this, Tokayev said with hatred, "These Bulgarian white-eyed wolves have forgotten the kindness of our country. Without the help of our country, they would not even be able to achieve independence." Freddy looked unhappy when he heard Tokayev's words. He has no doubts about Russian intelligence. Russia's intelligence capabilities in Bulgaria are still very credible. There are not many Bulgarians who have a favorable impression of Russia. As for whether the Italians would be dazzled by the Bulgarians' conditions, Freddy couldn't guarantee this. Since he knew the temperament of the Italians, it was probably a 50-50 thing point in this case. Austria-Hungary needs to warn its ally before this to let it know Austria-Hungary's attitude point. But if they want to express their attitude on behalf of Vienna, the Russians must express something point. Freddy thought about this and replied, Ambassador Tokayev wants our country to exert influence on Italy and prevent it from helping Bulgaria, which will affect our country's relations with it. At this point, Ambassador Freddy stopped. Tokayev is also a person who knows the elegant meaning of string music by hearing it, and he can still not understand the meaning of the other party. He had already considered it before he came here. As long as he wanted the Austro-Hungarians to take action, he would still have to give them the benefits they deserve. Anyway, he didn't have to pay Russian money. Tokayev said with a smile. In this regard, I discussed this with the Prime Minister of Serbia and they are willing to accept a 10% concession from your country on the transit cargo transportation fee. What? Tokayev said is Serbia's biggest problem at the moment. They have no outlet to the sea, so basically most of the goods need to transit through Austria-Hungary, and Austria-Hungary charges a high transportation transit fee for this. Now in order to prevent Bulgaria from becoming too powerful, Serbia must use its interests to win over Austria-Hungary. In this regard, Serbian Prime Minister Grujic is very aware of this, so there is no way to make necessary concessions. Even if Austria-Hungary annexed Bosnia and Herzegovina, which has half of the Serb population, they could only grit their teeth and acquiesce. As for why they chose to target Bulgaria instead of Italy, in addition to Italy being an ally of Austria-Hungary, the two countries also did not want a regional power to appear in the region. For this goal, they would rather hold their noses and acquiesce to the entry of one more player than tolerate the emergence of a powerful country in the region that may lead the region. So before World War I, it was impossible for a country to crush the entire Balkans to emerge, while the Austria-Hungary and Russian ambassadors were plotting against Bulgaria in the Prime Minister's office in Rome. Bulgarian Prime Minister Stambolov was also talking with Prime Minister Depretis. Chapter 262 Rome Peace Talks, Part 2. Prime Minister Depretis, our country attaches great importance to its relations with your country. Our country unanimously believes that relations with your country will become the main direction of Bulgaria's future diplomacy, and for this reason our country is willing to form a stronger relationship with your country. Bulgarian Prime Minister Stambolov in the Prime Minister's office is hyping the close relationship between the two countries to Italian Prime Minister Depretis. The sentiment is so profound that people who don't know it would think that the two countries are as good as wearing a pair of trousers. Depretis looked at the Bulgarian Prime Minister in front of him and felt that this scene was so familiar. This was not the same situation when he went to Berlin to seek alliances a few years ago. However, this trick did not work at all against Prime Minister Bismarck, who had already left office. If it hadn't been for the sudden change in Russia, his humiliation would have been in vain. Unexpectedly, things turned around, and it was Italy's turn to enjoy this treatment. However, unlike Germany, Bulgaria does significantly help Italy expand its influence in the Balkans. Unlike King Carlo, Italian officials headed by Depretis are indeed interested in the Balkans, but Bulgaria's wish to gain Italy's friendship with empty words is too wishful thinking. So Depretis waited for the Bulgarian Prime Minister to finish speaking before speaking slowly. Your Excellency Stambolov, our country also has a good impression of Bulgaria. However, if we want to push the relationship between the two countries to a high level, there are too many things that need to be taken into consideration, which involves all aspects. Do you understand? Depretis is completely ignoring the rabbit and not letting the eagle fly. What he said is all nonsense. How could Stambolov, as the Prime Minister of Bulgaria, not understand that he is waiting for Bulgaria to make an offer? Although he didn't expect to achieve his goal with a few kind words, it still made him feel the attitude of the Italians. This can be discussed, but a sufficient price must be paid. It is much easier to just talk about interests this time. Stambolov believes that the interests Bulgaria has come up with this time are enough to make Italians excited. He then smiled and said, "Of course we will not forget the help we have given to your country. For this reason, our country believes that economic and trade exchanges between the two countries should be increased to make the relationship between the two countries closer." We believe that reducing the import and export tariffs between the two countries will increase the developing economic flows, can bring substantial improvements to both countries. The conditions in Bulgaria seem to be pretty good, but why does Depretis feel so familiar? Isn't this a trick he used in Germany, since he failed to impress the Germans with this condition at that time? It will be equally difficult for the Bulgarians to impress him this time. He asked with a smile. So how much does your country think should be lowered? Our country believes that it is reasonable to reduce the current 25% tariff between the two countries to 20%. Stambolov, who failed to understand Depretis' inner thoughts, immediately told Bulgaria's conditions, but he did not know that this condition did not meet the expectations of the Italian Prime Minister. Your Excellency Stambolov, your country's proposal is very beneficial to increasing economic and trade exchanges between your country and our country. I believe it will greatly promote the economies of both countries. Although Depretis expressed his thanks, Stambolov, who was familiar with diplomatic rules, was not happy in his heart because the Italian Prime Minister in front of him did not give the answer he wanted. It seemed that this condition did not satisfy the Italians. Thinking of this, Stambolov glanced at the Foreign Minister Popkov beside him and saw an unpleasant look in his eyes. It seems that we need to come up with the final conditions. Actually, in addition to believing that lowering tariffs can promote the development of our two countries, we actually have another request for our visit this time. Stambolov's words made Prime Minister Depretis and Foreign Minister Bacona feel a little confused. What else can Bulgaria do? Soon, Stambolov solved the mystery. Actually, we have another purpose for coming here this time, which is to hope to raise funds in your country. Financing. Faced with the financing words of the Bulgarian Prime Minister in front of him, Depretis showed a puzzled expression. As we all know, Italy itself is not a country suitable for financing. Domestic capital is not enough for itself, so how can it provide financing for others? However, Depretis' doubts were soon relieved by Stambolov's words. It's like this. Your country also knows that, although our country has gained a large territory in this war, our current financial situation is not good. With the end of the war, our country's main energy needs to be transferred to the Macedonian region. In terms of development, among them, the railway from Sofia through Skopje to Salonika is particularly important to our country. However, given our country's current financial revenue, it is very difficult for our country to build this railway alone. Hope to be able to finance in your country. Hearing this, Depretis couldn't help but interject. Does your country plan to use equity financing or debt financing? Share. So, how much does your country plan to raise? 40% share of the total share capital. Speaking of this, Stambolov added another layer of price tag. In addition, our country plans to expand the Salonika port to facilitate our country's use of this port to expand exports, which also requires 40% financing. At this point, Depretis still doesn't understand. Maybe Bulgaria is indeed short of funds, but projects related to national strategy, such as the expansion of the Salonika port and the railway linking to Sofia, do not need to give up shares at all, because this is a profitable business. As long as Bulgaria places these two projects in Paris or London and publicly issues debt, there will be many people willing to invest. There is no need to take out shares. Such a sensitive thing. This is the Bulgarians giving up their interests in Macedonia, and their purpose is very obvious, which is to protect Salonika, Macedonia's largest port. Don't blame the Bulgarians for wanting to protect this port. This port is too important to them. As long as Bulgaria can retain this port, it will no longer be locked up in the Black Sea. This will be of huge benefit to Bulgaria's strategic situation. Whether it is military, economic, or even political, the endless benefits are visible to the naked eye. Faced with such a generous offer from the Bulgarian Prime Minister in front of him, Depretis was really moved. Not only him, but also Foreign Minister Bacona beside him was even more moved. If they hadn't considered that such a major matter needed to be reported to the king, they would have almost agreed on the spot. But in the end, Depretis injured it. I personally agree with Bacona about your country's request. I also believe that your country's performance and sacrifices in this war and the Macedonian region as compensation is a very reasonable request. Although This is only the private attitude of the Italian Prime Minister and Foreign Minister. It still makes the Bulgarians happy. Such generous conditions finally stunned them. However, in order to avoid long nights and dreams, Stambolov still asked with concern. I would like to ask, how long will it take for your country to give an official reply? It won't take too long. I will go to the palace immediately and report your country's requirements to your majesty. Depretis. Answer made Stambolov feel at ease when he arrived. If he gets the full support of the Italians, I believe it will at least reduce Bulgaria's pressure by half on the issue of Macedonia's ownership. Chapter 263 Treaty of Rome. I don't agree to this condition. Depretis rushed to the palace excitedly and reported Bulgaria's generous conditions to Carlo, but was given a slap in the face. He had no idea that the king would refuse the Bulgarians' conditions as soon as he opened his mouth. For this reason, Depretis believes it is necessary to explain. Your Majesty, the conditions for the Bulgarians are already very generous. The expansion of the port of Thessaloniki and the financing of the railway to Sofia will not only exert economic influence on Bulgaria, but also have many political benefits. Listening to the Prime Minister's explanation of the benefits of Bulgaria's generous conditions, Carlo felt irritated and couldn't help but interrupt the other party's speech. Prime Minister, there are preconditions for the Bulgarians. This is to help them keep Salonika. Have you considered that other countries may have different views? Faced with Carlo's words, Depretis immediately explained. Your Majesty, we have considered this before, but we think this problem is not a big one. The attitudes of Serbia and Greece will be discussed by the Bulgarians, and what we mainly face is the pressure from big countries such as Britain, France, Austria, and Russia. In this regard, after comprehensive consideration, the government believes that the attitudes of Germany and France do not need to be taken into consideration because they have little interest in the Balkans. Although Britain is tilted towards the Balkan issue due to its relationship with Greece, its influence on the Balkans is still limited. It is also basically focused on Greece and is not very interested in other regions and countries. Austria-Hungary is our ally. As long as we give some benefits from Bulgaria, I believe we can gain the other party's understanding. So the only Russian attitude that needs to be considered. However, although Russia has the ability to exert influence on the Balkans, it is separated by Romania after all, so it is quite inconvenient in terms of actual influence and measures. In addition, the exchanges between our country and Russia are not intensive. Even if they want to take measures, it will only be in economic diplomacy, which we can bear. After Depretis' analysis, it seems that Italy only needs to put in a certain amount of pressure to reap sufficient rewards. This seems very incredible to Carlo. When did the government become so confident and completely regarded the pressure from Austria-Hungary and Russia as nothing? In fact, this is a deviation in Carlo's and the government's understanding of Italy. In Carlo's mind, Italy is still a big country with poor national power. Although it has the power to crush other small countries, it fails to fight against big countries. They are naturally at a disadvantage. On the government's side, perhaps it is the result of Carlo's hard work. In the eyes of other Italian officials, Italy has continuously expanded its territory and has the upper hand everywhere. Therefore, Italy is no longer the country that relied on weakness during the Tunisian crisis. An unbearable look. Whether it is economically, militarily, or politically, Italy has the confidence to make its voice heard in Europe, and other major countries must also give Italy the necessary respect. It is precisely these two cognitive deviations that lead to differences in opinions between Carlo and the government regarding Bulgaria. The government believed that this condition was enough to stand up for the Bulgarians, while Carlo believed that Italy's strength was not currently suitable to fight Austria-Hungary and Russia in the Balkans. Therefore, in the face of Prime Minister Depretis' explanation, after some consideration, Carlo still believed that Italy's center of gravity could not shift to the Balkans, even if Italy had already won a large area of territory in the region this time. Your Excellency Prime Minister, we cannot accept Bulgaria's request this time. Our country's current focus still needs to be on the country. Improving our national strength is the top priority at the moment. Investing too much energy in the Balkans will only drag down our country's development. Economy. Faced with Carlo's explanation, Prime Minister Depretis somewhat disagreed. But we need a market, and the conditions in Bulgaria this time are very conducive to our country's expansion of the market in the Balkans, which can also promote economic development. Depretis had already sent someone to calculate before, and according to Bulgaria's conditions, it would bring nearly 20 million lira benefits to Italy every year. This benefit is already very good, enough for Italy to make the choice to fully support Bulgaria. Even if you pay a certain price for this, it is worth it. However, although Depretis said how tempting the benefits of Bulgaria were, Carlo still did not change his words, and continued to ask Prime Minister Depretis, "Your Excellency Prime Minister, what would you say is the core of our country's current diplomacy?" Faced with Carlo's question, Depretis answered without hesitation, "It's an alliance treaty with Germany and Austria." Yes, even Prime Minister Depretis knows that the current core of Italian diplomacy is the alliance of the three emperors. Italy relies on this alliance to thrive. In the past 10 years after hearing Depretis' answer, Carlo continued to ask, "So is it worth it for us to have a bad relationship with Austria-Hungary over the Balkans?" In fact, Carlo was not asking about Austria-Hungary, but the Germany behind it. In the alliance of three emperors, Italy was far less closely related than the other two countries. Not only Carlo knew this, but everyone in the Italian political arena also knew this. Given the huge benefits Italy has gained from the alliance of three emperors, Italy is now inseparable from this relationship. Not to mention the large area of territory that Italy is about to acquire, which will also take time to digest. Not to mention that, in order to get Germany to agree to support this war, they had already hurt the other side. If they offended Austria-Hungary again, what would happen next? You must know that in this era, there are no clear boundaries and the diplomatic relations between countries are not fixed. So Italy must take into account the attitudes of its allies. Depretis, who also knew this, fell silent after hearing Carlo. Before, he was carried away by interests and thought of the problem too simply. Only after Carlo proposed it did he realize that full support would inevitably harm the relationship with Austria-Hungary. Compared with that benefit, the three emperors alliance would be more important. It seems that the conditions for the Bulgarians are not easy to get, which is a pity. With these words of Depretis, it was also announced that the Bulgarian attempt had completely failed. The subsequent negotiations were also difficult to handle in Bulgaria, which lacked Italian support. Facing other countries with malicious intentions, the Bulgarian delegation was in a dilemma in the venue. A few days later, the Bulgarian delegation, looking as hen-faced, even left the meeting angrily. "These damn guys, they don't want to see our country completely regain its territory." A member of the delegation who couldn't help but cursed after walking out of the venue. As the head of the delegation, Prime Minister Stamboliv was indifferent to the curses behind him, because he was mentally prepared after Italy rejected their proposal. But when he thought about Salonika being handed back to the Ottomans, he felt as if a knife had been stabbed in his heart. In particular, Adrianople also had to be returned to the Ottomans, which was even more heartbreaking. However, although he left the venue angrily this time, Stamboliv knew that this time it was just to let other countries see Bulgaria's dissatisfaction, and they would eventually need to return to the venue. After all, so many sacrifices have been made, and most of Macedonia must get it. Otherwise it will fail the people in the country, who are waiting for it. So after a month of wrangling, the quite dissatisfied Bulgarians could only sign the treaty. After more than a month of negotiations, all countries finally signed the contract. According to this contract, the Ottomans lost most of their European and African territories in this war. Only southern Macedonia, today's Greek Macedonia, and eastern Thrace remained. Among these lost territories, Italy took the most in Europe. They took Albania and Kosovo, as well as the southern 12 islands headed by Rhodes Island. Considering the feelings of other countries, Italy withdrew half of the 12 islands, the least important. Moreover, they also ensured the independence of Crete, and could be counted among its vassals. Coupled with the Libyan area it acquired, it can be regarded as quite profitable. After Italy, the seemingly aggrieved Bulgarians gained the second largest territory, and most of Macedonia was included in their pockets. Although the Salonica, which he coveted the most, was not obtained, at least his gains outweighed his efforts, and he was considered to have made a fortune. As for Greece and Serbia, although they each won a piece of territory due to other factors, they are not comparable to Bulgaria. Therefore, when facing the increasingly powerful Bulgarians, the two countries quickly announced their alliance, which made the future situation in the Balkans more and more turbulent. As for the weakest Grand Duchy of Montenegro, a little benefit can satisfy them. With all countries signing the contract, the war came to an end. But anyone with a discerning eye can see that the turmoil in the Balkans has just begun. As for the future, this requires the wisdom of all countries. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 264 Post-War Meeting. In any case, the Roman treaty finally silenced the war in the Balkans. How countries should respond to the current situation will be a matter for the future. But in any case, with the end of the war, countries have time to clean up the squeezed affairs in their hands. Italy, which has made the most profits this time, now has time to rectify many things that have been caused by this war. Of course, no matter what happens, it can't compare to the post-war summary meeting held this time. Today in the palace, a large number of high-ranking military and political officials gathered together, all of whom came to attend this meeting. Many senior military and political officials gathered together, and everyone naturally took this opportunity to communicate among themselves as the absolute main force of the military. All 5 generals of the army came this time. In a corner of the venue, 5 generals representing the army were chatting quietly, but judging from their expressions, the result of the discussion was not very good. Because a piece of news was told to the other 4 people by the Minister of War. They were not happy, including General Cardona, who had made great contributions this time. Because His Excellency, the Minister of War, brought them bad news in view of the performance in this war. The government decided to expand the size of the guards from the current 3 regiments to 2 divisions. Although the guards are also under the jurisdiction of the army, the relationship between the army and the guards can be seen from the expressions of several generals. It is no wonder that they are happy. This news confirmed, as one of the most outstanding generals in the army during this war, General Cardona knew that he had asked a stupid question. As soon as he asked this question, sure enough, before he could finish his words, Admiral Saragat, who brought the news, looked at him and said, "The news I got is that this matter has basically been determined. The reason is to reward the army for its outstanding performance in this war." The reason given by Admiral Saragat made everyone feel anxious, even if they were thick-skinned. Using this reason to expand the Praetorian Guards is simply murderous and heartbreaking. There's no way to change it. Faced with the words of the Minister of War, some people wanted to try to prevent the expansion of the Guards. Faced with this sentence, Admiral Saragat asked rhetorically, how to block this, and for what reason? General Saragat was right. The army had no reason to stop it this time. The performance of the Guards on the battlefield this time was obvious to all. Captured the island of Crete, and captured Salonika together with the Bulgarian army, making a great contribution to the encirclement of the main Ottoman force. Then he landed on the Asia Minor Peninsula, and blocked the Ottoman attack on the Bulgarian army from the flanks. Everything about this can be seen by everyone, and the army has no excuse to say that the Guards did not fight well. As for the Marine Corps, although its performance was not bad, it did not get the opportunity to expand due to the suppression of the Navy. Everyone from Admiral Garlick to the Minister of the Navy can see clearly that the Italian Navy is still in a weak position. If the Marine Corps expands, conflicts between land and sea will be stimulated, and currently the Navy does not have the ability to expand its influence on land. Their main purpose is to expand the size of the fleet, so that the Italian Navy can show its influence in the Mediterranean. If the Marine Corps is expanded, the speed of fleet expansion will inevitably be squeezed. Just when the big bosses of the army were worrying about the expansion of the Imperial Guard, they heard a report. "Your Majesty, here you come." As these words came, everyone immediately lined up, to welcome Carlo's arrival according to their respective duties. After briefly greeting those present, everyone took their seats, and as the Prime Minister stated the purpose of the meeting, he officially announced that the meeting had begun. Since it is a post-war summary meeting, we first need to understand the cost of this war. After all, everyone present wants to know how much it costs, Your Majesty. Everyone, this war is now over. According to statistics from the Ministry of Finance, the current war with the Ottomans has cost a total of 997 million lire. Among them, the cost of purchasing various weapons and ammunition materials is 537 million lire to support the Allies. The total cost of construction, maintenance, security, and procurement of the occupied area is 272 million lire, and the total cost of medical treatment, funeral and other expenses is 221 million lire, and the total expenditure is 1.119 billion lire. After the confiscation of various Ottoman properties totaled 122 million lire, we still have a balance of 203 million lire from the war funds we have raised. With the words of Finance Minister Tegela, everyone present knew that the funds for this war have not been spent yet. Regarding this, people at the scene basically have estimates, but the specific figures are only known now. After all, no one expected that the Ottomans performed so poorly in this war. Although there were ups and downs later, it was still very smooth. You must know that before the war, the Italian military believed that, in order to deal with the Ottomans, Italy would need to pay 50,000 to 80,000 casualties. The actual situation is that Italy only suffered more than 30,000 casualties, which was much lower than expected. After the finance minister finished speaking, other ministers then announced their department's performance in this war. After everyone from the government had spoken, Admiral Garlock, the Minister of the Navy, was the first to speak. In this war, the Navy organized more than 30 operations and dispatched 759 ships of various types. It sank 79 Ottoman warships and transport ships of various types, successfully completing various mission indicators. Since the Ottomans' weak navy avoided fighting, the Italian navy's performance in this war was not very good. So after Admiral Gorak finished speaking, he sat back and waited for the next person's report. Needless to say, the army must be next. Facing everyone's attention, General Sergeant, as the Minister of War, stood up naturally. The army mobilized a total of 590,000 troops in this war, of which 319,000 were mobilized to fight the Ottomans, annihilating a total of 179,500 enemies, and capturing 179,500 enemies. In addition, our army also suffered losses of 31,200. After saying what he should report, Admiral Sergeant sat back just like Admiral Gorak. After everyone reported, Carlo spoke. This victory over the powerful Ottoman enemy could not have been achieved without the cooperation of all departments, as well as the bloody battles of the officers and soldiers of the army and the navy. The victory of this war is the best reward for us. But the war is over. Then our focus will shift to the planning and construction of new territories. As Carlo took the topic to new territories, everyone present naturally understood. Before Carlo could continue to speak, Prime Minister Despotis spoke. Your Majesty, our government has made a detailed plan. I wonder if Your Majesty is interested in hearing it. Prime Minister, please speak. With Carlo's permission, Prime Minister Despotis revealed the government's plan, in view of the fact that in the large territory currently acquired by our country, a large amount of coal has been discovered in Kosovo, as well as lead, zinc, chromium and its original silver mines that can be commercially mined. So our government believes that, in order to develop these minerals, our country needs building a load-carrying railway from the port of Durrës to Pristina. In addition, in view of the efficiency of railway transportation, we believe that it is also necessary to build various smelting plants nearby to make reasonable use of the resources in the area. Following Prime Minister Despotis' speech, the government's plan for the newly occupied territory was also released. Currently, Italy's main investments are in Albania and Kosovo. Among them, the chromium ore resources discovered in Albania surprised the explorers. The nearly 30 million tons of chromium ore reserves are extremely rare in Europe. Therefore, The government places 93% of its investment in these two places, and the remaining 7% is divided between Libya and the southern Vatican Islands. Don't blame the Italian government for being so discriminatory. Who makes Libya look like a barren land? Apart from producing some livestock, dates and other agricultural products, the only decent product is well salt. This adds up to an export volume of less than 5 million lire. Who knows? Can you take it seriously? In addition to this development plan, the military also talked about public security and security plans. It was not until the meeting came to an end that Carlo asked another question. What are your plans for those locals? Chapter 265 Solution to the New Territory. Carlo's words were very problematic because he didn't ask about placement or comfort, but directly used the plan. Faced with the issue of Carlo, Prime Minister Despotis had communicated with His Majesty before, but he was not satisfied. Because His Majesty Carlo's request was to drive away all these locals. This approach has not been used in other countries except Russia, which has always been known for its barbarians. To be more precise, no European country has used it this way in the past 100 years. Despotis, who considers himself a civilized person, certainly disagrees. These are nearly 1 million people, and it would be a big project for Italy to drive them all away. And not to mention the international public opinion that drove these people away. The time and energy spent alone made Italy very hurt. Not to mention that there may be various resistances, which will drag down Italy's economic development. Faced with the various reasons given by Despotis, Carlo, as the king, also had his own understanding. These new territories, whose inhabitants were overwhelmingly religious, were a source of instability for Italy. Although in this era, it was far less arrogant than in later generations. For Carlo, who was bent on localizing it, these were all stubborn element. Although Carlo did not have the iron fist of communism, he did have the iron fist of the kingdom. For the long-term stability of Italy in these areas, it is better to spend more now than to cause trouble in the future. However, Despotis and others completely failed to understand his painstaking efforts and only saw the petty profits in front of them, which made him equally dissatisfied. In this case, he plans to make this issue public and let Italy's senior officials make their own choices. Faced with Carlo's sudden question, Prime Minister Despotis immediately spoke. In this regard, the government has already made a plan. If the Christian believers in the area are willing to relocate, we can let them go. If they are unwilling to relocate, we can accept them after they swear allegiance to the kingdom. In addition, the Christian priests in the area can be admitted, must be recognized by our country, otherwise it is prohibited to preach the doctrine. In addition, the methods Despotis mentioned are basically the current methods used by Europe, mainly Austria-Hungary, against Japan. Many of the government's measures have been borrowed from neighboring countries. After listening to Despotis' story, Carlo shook his head and said, although this method is good, it takes too long. It will take at least 100 years to reverse the local people's religious beliefs. If you encounter diehards, it will be even more of a headache. If you ask me, it is better to do it once and for all. Just drive them away and start from there. A large number of local immigrants are the solution to long-term stability, but Your Majesty, this will delay the development of the local area. In addition, the energy, time, and cost required are not low. This will make the government debt even heavier. Your Majesty, you don't know the current difficulties of the government, right, Prime Minister Despotis' counterattack also hit home. Although Italy won the battle and gained a large territory, Italy currently has enough debt. If it continues to borrow money, the interest alone will weigh on everyone every year. Out of breath. Faced with the problems raised by the Prime Minister, Carlo Tong already had an idea. As for the issue of funding, I actually have an idea. If we want to reduce costs, then maybe we can find a way from the local residents. For example, those fields, plantations, mines, factories, etc. that cannot be taken away can all be used for us. Reduce financial burden. This is almost an explicit statement, allowing the government to find ways to deal with these evicted local residents. If external influences are not considered, it will actually benefit Italy a lot. First of all, space can be made for Italian people. Albania and Kosovo can accommodate at least 600,000 people. If the industrial construction carried out by the government in the local areas is included, millions of people can be accommodated. This has a great buffering effect on relieving the pressure in Italy, where there are too many people and too little land. In addition, the vacated area is also good for Carlo. The government cannot distribute those minerals, factories, plantations, etc. for free, so those who can acquire these industries must be rich and powerful dignitaries or wealthy people, bourgeoisie. These people formed Carlo's basic base. Yes, Carlo, the king of Italy, was the spokesperson of these people. This was something he had understood within 10 years of coming to this world, and the memories of his previous life could at most give him more. Take a look at the situation of Italian civilians. Don't forget this when distributing benefits. After talking about the financial response, Carlo looked at General Saragat and said, "I think the army should have enough measures to deal with these local people who do not cooperate with our country's policies." Seeing that the question attracted him, Admiral Saragat, who was originally watching the show, immediately answered seriously, "The local residents have nothing to worry about at all. Our military has already collected weapons in the area several times before. For those who lack weapons, we have many ways to make them obedient." General Saragat's words represent the army, and he has enough confidence in this matter. In this era of unconstrained hands and feet, public security warfare is much easier to fight than in the era of later generations when little news spread all over the world. Afghanistan is called the tomb of empires because it is restricted by various rules in modern times. In ancient times, this was not considered at all. It was just stepped on by various invaders, not to mention this kind of all-out operation. As long as the net is pulled several times, there will basically not be a few fish that slip through the net. In terms of public security and funding, Carlo has already come up with solutions. As for diplomacy, Carlo alone cannot solve this problem. But then again, everything is ended by King Carlo, so what should the high-ranking officials in the government do? So after telling 2 ways, Carlo stopped talking. However, although Carlo stopped speaking, Desperatus, as prime minister, clearly felt the power of the king's words. Before Carlo gave the solution, everyone in the venue obviously didn't agree, but now most people are moved. This method of benefiting most people in Italy at the expense of the newly occupied areas is really tempting. No, Foreign Minister Boccona took over the words. Actually, the diplomatic impact on our country is not that big. You have to know that these are all pagans. How much sympathy can you have for them? At the government level, except for the Ottomans, other countries should not have any sympathy for the government. The only thing that can affect us is to eliminate the impact of time. Will it delay the subsequent construction too much? Regarding the concerns of the foreign minister, Admiral Saragat immediately spoke. As for the expulsion operation, according to our military's methods, everything can be completed in 3 months at the fastest and half a year at the slowest. The Minister of War made such a statement because such an action would benefit the military a lot. First of all, this kind of action can increase the military's influence among the people. In addition, this kind of action also has a lot of money. Although most of it will be turned over, it can also collect a lot of finance to subsidize the army's expenses. After the Secretary of War finished speaking, Secretary of the Interior Sabo said immediately, "If we follow the time given by the military and transport the immigrants, the construction task will not be delayed too much, and the start of construction will be delayed by 3 or 4 months at most. This is an acceptable result." Well, in the face of interests, Prime Minister Desperatus was ruthlessly abandoned. Faced with such a situation, Desperatus is certainly not blind. Since everyone thinks that this is profitable and beneficial to everyone in Italy, he will certainly not continue to insist. As Desperatus's attitude changed, the meeting also came to an end, and Italy's policy on the new territory was also announced. I just don't know how the local residents will react when they know the result. Chapter 266 Complex Issues. The village of Kokit is located on the banks of the Drin River, only 31 kilometers away from the Albanian city of Shkodra. It is located on the main road from Albania to Kosovo, so there has always been an endless stream of caravans passing through the village, which also allows the residents of the village to profit a lot. Although the number of caravans traveling on this road has decreased a lot due to the war, the income of the village has not been reduced much, because the Italian army frequently passed through this area. On a new day, the villagers got up one after another, and they were busy. The fruits and vegetables in the farmland were a huge profit for them. Although the rulers have now been replaced by foreigners from the Apennine Peninsula, years of experience tell them that, if they want to keep to themselves, it will not have much impact on them. After all, they need to pay taxes. In fact, it's not just local residents who have this idea. There is a small military camp located 2 kilometers east of the village of Kokit. There is a company of Italian troops stationed here. Its main responsibility is to ensure the stability of the surrounding area and keep the road to Kosovo open at all times. But today, the commander of the military camp, Captain Gula, received different orders. You sure it came from the division headquarters, Captain? Gura had understood the order, but still wanted to confirm it again. Yes, this order was issued by the division commander himself. Faced with Captain Gurira's slightly questioning words, the messenger was not surprised, because 9 out of 10 commanders had asked this question. Although the questions asked are different, the core content is the same point. When he heard that the order was given by the division commander himself, Captain Gurira said nothing more. Captain Gurira has been in the army for a long time, and he also knows a lot about the temperament of the division commander, Major General Brazo. This division commander rarely issues orders directly. He usually issues them in the name of the division headquarters, and in his own name. The orders issued in the name of the People's Liberation Army are all urgent and serious orders. Such orders cannot be changed or questioned. The troops below must strictly implement them 100%. Since the messenger said this, Captain Gula must strictly implement it, even if he has any doubts. After seeing off the orderlies, Captain Gira called for the orderlies. Call the deputy company commander and squad platoon leader in immediately. We have a mission now, as you command, Captain. As the orderlies found the deputy company commander and squad platoon leader one by one, a meeting on operational deployment was held in the military camp. This meeting didn't last long, and it was over after an hour. After the meeting ended, and the squad platoon leaders left, Captain Gira spoke to his deputy company commander. Then we just need to wait for people from the government to arrive. The people from the government that Captain Gira said were actually ready, but the Albanian governor's palace in Tirana had not yet issued an order, because as the governor of Albania, Viscount Demir is still a little hesitant. Viscount Demir, who previously held a position in Italy, finally managed to become the governor of Albania this time, is also a sign of his desire to make progress. You must know that before this, Italy had only 2.5 governors. The governor of Sicily could only be counted as half due to many domestic restrictions. Look at the governors of East Africa and Borneo, they are almost half the prime minister. Last year, the governor of Lanfang was renamed the governor of Borneo. From the name change, you can see Italy's ambitions for the island. Although Italy has established 3 new governors this time, his ability to seize the second most important governor of Albania is also a manifestation of his ability. One more thing, the most important governor in the new establishment is the governor of Kosovo. Italy plans to invest the most money because it has discovered large quantities of much needed minerals in the area. Then there is the governorship of Albania that he served as. As for the governorship of Libya, because the land is sparsely populated and full of desert, no one wants to eat sand, so he is a despised position. In addition to him, the governor of Kosovo, Mills, has just arrived. As for the governor of Libya, Howard Georgi, he has only just set foot on that land with the army. It is estimated that even where to live is still a problem. It's just that they didn't expect that when they were all in place and not familiar with anything, this fatal order came from the country. Expelling all the locals from the country. If this order were issued by another person, no matter who it was, even the prime minister, Viscount Demir would dare to spray him to pieces. This is simply adding chaos and not giving them any time to prepare. You must know that before they came, the plan was not like this. Now that they suddenly made earth-shaking changes, it would take time for people to adapt. Although he doesn't like these pagans who believe in the Quran, he can't just drive them away. Because of this, just the expulsion and the delay in immigration made him and the newly established Albanian government extremely busy. It's just that the person who gave the order didn't dare to say anything, so he could only execute it silently. Of course, it is impossible for him to implement this policy alone, and a large number of officials are needed. This raises another problem, that is, most of the officials sent with Viscount Demir are not ready yet. Yes, it seems very simple to drive away the locals. All you need to do is send troops and officials to drive them away. But in fact it is very complicated and requires someone to receive it. In addition, a series of tasks such as planning the route, arranging escort, and registering the property are also required. In addition, there is another very important reason, which is to change the philosophy of officials. Being an official in the colonies and being an official at home are two different styles. In the colony, as long as you complete the work assigned by your superiors, then at other times, if you compensate yourself a little, nothing will be said. Look at the officials who have returned from Borneo and East Africa in the past few years. They all bring rich wealth, which makes many people envious. In fact, Rome is well aware of this. This is a kind of compensation for the various risks they bear. We must know that colonial officials cause nearly 100 casualties every year due to various diseases, accidents and other factors. Especially in Borneo, which has a tropical rainforest climate, accounting for 70% of the total. Without adequate compensation, how can people work with peace of mind? As for China, due to the stable environment and the political cleanup in recent years, it is no longer possible to make as much money as we did nearly 10 years ago. In China, nearly 100 officials at all levels are sent to prison every year for corruption and bribery. When Rome issued an order to expel the locals, it was obvious that they wanted to operate this place as a native land. Since it is local, then laws and regulations must be implemented in accordance with local regulations. This will make many people disappointed, and Viscount Demir needs to adjust the mentality of these people first. Viscount Demir, who had just finished the meeting, returned to his office and drank a large glass of water first. Governor, the military came to ask again, and asked us when we will send people there. Before he could take a breath, the secretary informed him of the military's urging. Tell them to give us 3 more days. After hearing the secretary's words, Viscount Demir answered without raising his head. Doesn't he know what the military is thinking? It just wants to get more benefits from this operation. That's why he urged himself one after another. After all, the military has been here for several months, and he and the government officials have been here for less than half a month. There are too many ways to take advantage of information asymmetry. Viscount Demir is a man who is good at this, and the military can take advantage of this. So the first time he came here, he immediately arranged for someone to get to know him. Judging from the information learned so far, Albania has a lot of property, and he needs to arrange manpower to keep an eye on these properties. 3 days can be said to be fast or slow, but no matter what, within 3 days, the government sent many people to compete with the military's troops to carry out the eviction. A military security operation is about to begin. Chapter 267 Detonating Public Opinion. The atmosphere in Kalquit village was unusual today. The frightened villagers huddled closely together, looking at the Italian officers and soldiers surrounding them. Everyone, according to the decree from Rome, Italian citizenship cannot be granted to you. In addition, according to the immigration decree, everyone has half a day to pack up their belongings and leave Albania for the Ottomans. Now please pack your things. A government official, accompanied by an interpreter, loudly announced to the surrounded villagers an order from Rome. Sure enough, the order to expel them immediately caused a commotion among the crowd. If it weren't for the Italian officers and soldiers who were surrounded by armed soldiers, the villagers would have wanted to tear the official who was shouting to death alive. At this time, they can only fight back with their own words. My family has lived here for generations. You can't do this. Why should we be expelled? We have to protest. We don't want to leave. Various voices expressed the anger of the residents at the scene, but the government officials present did not care about the anger of these locals. He took out his pocket watch and looked at the time on it. It's 9:12 now. You must leave at 13:12. Although his voice was not loud, it was extremely intimidating and silenced the noise at the scene point. He was very satisfied with the effect, so he looked at the crowd and continued. So, you'd better pack your things quickly, otherwise you'll forget what you didn't take, and you won't be able to come back. Following his words, there was a lot of excitement at the scene. The gangsters and others immediately rushed back to their homes to clean up. Only 2 or 3 kittens were left at the scene point among the 2 or 3 people. The dress of one of the old men caught the attention of government officials because he was dressed in clerical attire and looked like an imam. I saw him walking up to the government official with a serious face. Your Excellency, when your country treats us this way, aren't you afraid of the violent reaction of international public opinion and the majority of Christian believers facing this imam who still has some worldview? The government officials looked at him slightly seriously. Then which country will stand up for you? The Ottomans have just suffered a defeat. Other powerful countries will not pay much attention to you. As for public opinion, it cannot influence the government. As for your believers, what does it have to do with our country? As long as you dare, by causing trouble on our soil, we will make them regret not returning to the arms of Allah. Faced with government officials who were unable to get enough food and salt, the imam had no other choice but to encourage everyone to resist. Look at the heavily armed Italian officers and soldiers around him, so that the people of Allah would not suffer anymore. At 13:12 in the afternoon, the regrouped local people, dragging their families with what they could carry, left the hometown, where they were born and raised under the escort of Italian officers and soldiers. The sound of crying along the way was very desolate. As for the dealers in their houses and lands, a large number of Italian immigrants will take care of them in the future. Of course, they will not be able to take them away from them in the future. Tragedies in villages like Kokit can be seen everywhere in Albania and Kosovo. On this day, Italy dispatched 100,000 soldiers and government officials to detain and drive away various villages and towns. Most of these expelled people will pass through the Macedonian region and be sent to the Ottoman territory. A small number of people who believe in Orthodox Christianity and Catholicism will be accepted by the Sephardic and Greek countries. Of course, these local residents are not all people who accept the situation. There are also many people who are unwilling to leave like this and break out various resistances. Most of those who resisted were suppressed by heavily armed officers and soldiers. What awaited them was to be thrown into various mining areas for labor reform. There are still some people who are lucky enough to escape. They are temporarily out of danger, but they will face endless encirclement and suppression. Next. Beginning in February 1891, waves of resistance erupted in Albania and Kosovo. In the peak month of March, there were more than 400 attacks. These Albanians who were unwilling to leave tried every means to attack the Italian government, army, and immigrants. However, although the frequency of attacks was very high at the beginning, the resistance of these people was rootless. After the local people were driven away, they lacked the necessary supplies, weapons, and personnel. After Italy drove away most of the local people, it deployed troops to intensify its crackdown. The results were surprisingly good. In September of the second half of the year, the number of attacks had dropped to less than 30 per month, and the number of attacks continued to decrease irreversibly. By January 1893, the last rebels were wiped out, and Albania and Kosovo became an integral part of the Kingdom of Italy. These are all the follow-up results. As for now, although Italy has made various moves to block news, how could it be possible that no one knew about the large-scale operation to expel nearly 600,000 people from 2 places at once? France's Libérateur was the first to report extensively on the news that Italy was expelling locals in Albania and Kosovo, causing humanitarian disasters. Other newspapers later quoted it, and in less than 3 days the entire civilized world knew about it. For this reason, various countries asked the Italian government about this matter, but they were dismissed on the grounds that the Italian army was suppressing rebels. However, the Ottomans issued a serious protest. In response to the Ottoman protest, the Italian government threw its protest letter into the trash. However, this matter could not be hidden for long, because a large number of expelled local people passed through the Macedonia area and appeared in Austrian South Macedonia. And with the emergence of these refugees, a large number of Italian actions on the ground were exposed. Faced with such a situation, Italy could not shirk it. And the pressure from international public opinion on Italy was not small. For this reason, the Ottoman Empire, which had just lost the war, issued a serious statement, claiming that Italy's actions in Albania and Kosovo were ethnic cleansing. According to Italian Foreign Minister Gemini Bacona, the Ottomans also carried out ethnic cleansing against local Armenians in Armenia. The Ottoman purge of Armenians was no secret to Europe. Although the Armenian genocide had not yet occurred in the Ottoman Empire at this time, it had no mercy on Armenians who believed in Christianity. Various exorbitant taxes and arbitrary oppression were commonplace. No one paid attention to it before, more because the area it is located in is of no interest to all countries, except Russia. However, life among Armenians in Russia is not very good. They are all the eldest brothers, not the second brothers. Faced with Italy's scandal about Armenia, the Ottomans didn't know what to say for a while, but in the end it became a dog-eat-dog affair. Although Italy solved the Ottoman censure with the Armenian issue, the government still had huge pressure. Because British Prime Minister Cecil issued a statement condemning Italy's actions in the Balkans. As for why the British suddenly jumped out, it is more because after Italy seized a large amount of Ottoman territory, Italy has threatened the security of the Eastern Mediterranean, especially the Suez Canal, which is crucial to it, and there are Italian colonies on both ends. This stance of the British is more of a knock. Although the British need Italy to contain France, they are not willing to see Italy's strength in the Mediterranean increase. Therefore, adding some obstacles to Italy's actions in the Balkans is not a good idea for Whitehall. Which is reasonable. After the United Kingdom expressed its views, France, the United States, Russia and other countries issued statements of condemnation, condemning Italy's ethnic cleansing in the Balkans. This has left Italy with a bad reputation internationally. But no matter what the outside world says, Italy's actions in the Balkans have not stopped at all. While the Balkans are carrying out vigorous operations, the Libyan region, which also belongs to Italy, is not idle either. Resuming the update, everyone has been waiting for a long time, and the two updates will not be missed. Chapter 268 Libya's problem. Tripoli is a historic city. The Phoenicians established the city as early as 814 BC. At that time, it was collectively known as Tripolis. Later, the ancient Roman Empire occupied this place, after defeating the Phoenicians. Now Italians are once again standing in the city where their ancient ancestors once ruled. Governor Howard Georgi stood in the former Ottoman residence that was temporarily converted into the governor's palace, looking at the Italian officers and soldiers who kept stopping the ship in the harbor in the distance. A large number of officers and soldiers led the horses and stepped off the ship. They were led by their respective commanders. Quickly walked towards the destination military camp. Only now do I feel that Libya is under the kingdom's control. The reason why Governor Georgi spoke like this is very simple. That is, the garrison was insufficient before. When Italy took over this territory from the Ottomans, it only brought more than 6,000 people. Although there are 5,000 cavalry among them, these people are still too few in the vast Libyan area. Moreover, the local nomadic tribes are not friendly to the newly arrived Italians. Although the Ottomans had the right to rule locally, they relied more on tribal leaders to maintain their rule. As a result, after the Ottomans left, the Italians had to touch the interests of local tribal leaders if they wanted to rule the area more closely. Both parties believe that they have advantages, so it would be surprising if they could reach an agreement. Since they couldn't reach an agreement, Governor Georgi had to think of other ways. At this time, Rome sent an order to expel the locals, which made him feel like a treasure. Of course, he also has a problem. That is, Libya is quite vast and sparsely populated. There are no more than 300,000 locals living on the vast land of Libya. What's even more troublesome is that these are nomadic people who can leave at any time. They can ride on horses or camels and catch up with cattle and sheep, so you can't find anyone. This is also the reason why Italy did not completely subdue the locals until the late 1930s. Regarding this point, Governor Giorgi wrote a letter to ask the governor of East Africa, His Excellency Antonio, and with his advice, he came up with his own ideas, that is, people can run away, and livestock can run away, but pasture water cannot run away. As long as Italy occupies key places such as pastures and water sources, those locals must come out, if they don't want to starve to death. However, the time and cost required to do so will not be too small. Governor Giorgi happened to have no shortage of time and money, because Carlo knew what was underground in Libya, so he gave the newly appointed man a guarantee that, as long as the local people in Libya were transferred away, the government and the army would give them enough support help. Although he only brought more than 6,000 people before, that was because the government needed to prioritize Albania and Kosovo. While the two countries were carrying out vigorous expulsion operations, George, the governor of Libya, believed that Libya also needed to produce results. So Governor Giorgi asked the government and the military for help. The military was still very helpful, and sent him to cavalry brigades with nearly 4,000 troops. Although it is difficult to launch a comprehensive campaign against Libya, it can still be done by prioritizing operations in the coastal areas. Roll, go and invite General Brennan. I have a plan and need the general's help. General Brennan, whom Governor Giorgi refers to, is currently the highest military commander in Libya. He needs to rely on this military chief to complete his plan. Because Major General Brennan's headquarters was not far from here, this man rushed over quickly. Your Majesty the Governor, are you looking for me? Major General Brennan, who came to Giorgi, asked the governor about the purpose of summoning him. As soon as he entered the door, Major General Brennan was previously the division commander of the 6th Cavalry Division. In this war, the cavalry did not have much opportunity to perform. Because the main battlefield is the hilly and mountainous terrain of the Balkans, the role of cavalry is greatly reduced. Therefore, after some consideration, Major General Brennan, who had not won many military exploits, chose to go to Libya to become a military officer. Libya, which was suitable for cavalry, was very beneficial to him in obtaining military exploits, allowing him to attack the Lieutenant General, Major General Brennan. The kingdom's expulsion operations in the Balkans are currently in full swing. Should we also start taking action? Facing the governor's inquiry, Major General Brennan was about to answer, absolutely, we just need to wait until all the troops are in place. It is estimated that our plan can start in about a week. It takes time to store ammunition, formulate security operations plans, and deploy troops. In addition, the domestic troops who have just arrived also need some time to adapt, so the 7 days given by Major General Brennan is already considered a rush point. Although Governor George has never been in the military, he has never eaten pork or seen pigs running. He also knows that each task requires time to advance, so he is not surprised by the time given by Major General Brennan. There is another situation that Quirinal is also very aware of. That is, although Italy has occupied Libya, they currently only occupy a few port cities along the Libyan coast. Although it is said to be a city, there are actually not many people there. Taking Tripoli at his feet as an example, it has a population of less than 20,000, which is just a larger town in Italy. As for other seaport cities such as Benghazi, Tobruk, Sirte and other seaport cities, the number ranges from 10,000 to 2,000 to 3,000. The total number of these various people is less than 70,000, which is not as large as the population of the 12 southern islands occupied by Italy. It is not an exaggeration to say that Giorgi is the worst governor. Major General Brennan's army also dispersed the troops in these cities like pepper. Even in Tripoli, the most important place, there were only about 2,000 people before reinforcement arrived. Therefore, if reinforcement had not arrived, he could only do guard work at most, and how could he devote his troops to cleaning tasks with the arrival of reinforcement? Governor Giorgi must of course take action to let Rome see the results of his efforts. Next, Major General Brennan reported the plan he had prepared to Governor Giorgi. In the previous time, as an aspiring general, Major General Brennan traveled to several places one after another, and he still had some knowledge of the tribal situation in Libya. The conversation between the two continued until sunset. After talking for an entire afternoon, the two of them parted ways. Then the Italian army's actions began to accelerate. They collected supplies, surveyed and mapped the latest maps, paid heavily to guides, and prepared to clear out the surrounding tribes. The week was spent in such busyness. After the scheduled time, the Italian troops stationed in various cities drove out of the city one after another. Under the leadership of their guides, they rushed to the tribes whose positions had been marked. Point in this operation, Italy dispatched a total of more than 8,000 cavalrymen, all of whom were fast-moving cavalry. It will teach those self-righteous tribal leaders a lesson. Chapter 269 Bad News. As Libya also begins its cleanup work, Italy's international public opinion has become increasingly unfavorable. Faced with this situation, the Italian government has not failed to act. They spent their almighty money to clear the way, and many foreign media, who were greedy for money, began to change the conversation, and began to excuse Italy without leaving any trace. They started with why Italy did this, and some started with history, talking about the hundreds of years of war between the Ottomans and Venice. Some start from the perspective of ethnicity, saying that Albanians were not originally living in Albania and Kosovo, and the local indigenous people were wiped out. Anyway, these newspapers can start from all aspects and find out the reasons from the expelled Albanians. It is precisely because of these paid efforts to run newspapers that media from various countries no longer criticize Italy one-sidedly. Although it is much worse than condemning it, it can somewhat allow people in other countries to obtain other information, which will be of great help in alleviating the pressure on the Italian government. As the main messenger of this expulsion policy, Carlo actually felt a lot of pressure, and even felt a little regretful. He had thought about the pressure from public opinion on Italy before, but he misjudged the magnitude of the pressure. In fact, it should be said that it was a miscalculation of the British attitude. As the current leader of the world, the British Empire can cause trouble to many countries with just one attitude. Although Carlo had a full understanding of the British Empire, the image of the sun set in the memory of later generations still had an impact on him to a greater or lesser extent. Therefore, this time the British just made a statement, which caused Italy's unsavory image in foreign public opinion, and made Carlo know that he had previously underestimated the influence of the British. But even though he felt in his heart that he had underestimated Britain, he still had no regrets about this action. Carlo had a profound understanding of the spread and exclusivity of drugs in later generations. This is the best time to solve this problem. If it is delayed until the 20th century, the era of rapid development of information and society, it will be even more difficult for Italy to deal with this problem. As for now, public opinion is nothing. Just grit your teeth and get through it. As long as no country wants to take actual action against Italy, then there is nothing to worry about. The best thing to do next time is to think more about the attitude of the British. Of course, in addition to considering international pressure, the government also takes action on the beginning and end of the expulsion operation. Regarding the expulsion operations in the Balkan Peninsula, those who were expelled had plenty of places to go, and the surrounding Ottoman and both CC countries all benefited from it. Although Italy looks down upon these people, to them, these people are very attractive. All four countries are helping people who have been expelled from Albania and Kosovo along the way, trying to keep these populations in their own countries. Their calculations are very precise. Although these people do not have much financial resources, as long as they are human beings, they can create wealth, which will still bring great benefits to the four countries. As for the vacant space, don't worry. Italy mobilized 5 to 6 million people from its homeland to go to the Balkans without any problems thanks to economic development over the years. Italy's population has grown from 28.46 million in 1881 to the current 32.09 million. This is not even Italy's actual growth rate. If you include the 3.21 million immigrants and immigrants to overseas colonies in the past 10 years, 470,000 people moved to various colonies. Italy's actual growth rate is also quite astonishing. Therefore, although Italy's economy is developing well, the domestic employment and mainland contradictions have not been changed. The employment growth brought about by Italy's economic development has been completely swallowed up by the high birth rate. In view of the current actual situation in Italy, many people within the government actually welcome Carlo's move to completely expel the locals. Although this has given Italy a bad reputation internationally, it has played a great role in alleviating domestic population pressure. In addition, according to the government's latest plan, they plan to move 600,000 people from their homeland to new territories in the Balkans within 3 years. This number needs to reach 800,000 within 5 years. The main destination of these immigrants is the current hotspot for Italian investment, Kosovo. As for Libya in North Africa, the Italian government only plans to relocate 120,000 people within 3 years, mainly to coastal areas suitable for agricultural production. As for the indigenous tribes in Libya, according to the government's arrangements, they were mainly forcibly transferred to the East African colonies. Some people may say that, if you have forced the other party to move away, won't the other party be resentful and cause trouble to the government of the new place? In fact, there is no need to worry about this. You must know that these people who have been relocated have absolutely no intention of doing this. Even if they really have complaints in their hearts, they do not dare to show it at all. Because of disputes with the local tribes where they settled, they would cling to the Italian government's lap. You must know that there is no free land in the world. Every piece of land on the 5 continents and 4 oceans is owned by people. The places they go to are allocated to them by the Italian government. This was obtained from the local tribe. No tribe or force would have a good look on someone who robbed their own territory. The high-ranking Italian governor general can't afford to offend him, so how can he be afraid of these local leopards who have moved from other places? And in order to prevent the tribes from North Africa from being too concentrated and detrimental to their development, Italy very thoughtfully divided these people into several parts with a maximum number of 10,000. And also thoughtfully found good neighbors for them, all with 20,000 to 30,000 people tribe. I believe in the good intentions of the Italian governor of East Africa. These tribes who migrated from North Africa will be grateful and will use the strategy of clinging to the thigh of the governor's palace to the extreme. As for whether there will be people who don't do this, I can't guarantee that. However, I believe that those who do not do this will not end well. There is no need for the Italians to do anything. As long as the local tribes find it profitable, I believe they will know what to do. Although these methods were not stated explicitly, Carlo still saw them clearly from the letter from Antonio, the governor of East Africa. Carlo still knew the reputation of this governor who ruled the people with an iron fist even as far away as Rome. The king of kings in East Africa. For the many tribal kings and dukes in East Africa, and other intimidating names, this governor Antonio is countless. They were all given to the colonial tribes in East Africa who had been docile under his discipline over the years. However, King Menelik I of Abyssinia praised him very much. He had said many times that he very much hoped to gain control from Governor Antonio, learn the experience of governing the people. Abyssinia currently has no emperor, and the highest is only the king. This is a title Menelik I demoted, since he considered that Italy is only a kingdom. However, although Menelik I praised Antonio, he did not know that he was the most wary of the East African governor. In Antonio's report to Rome, he called Menelik I the biggest hidden danger in the East African colonies, and he was not as surrendered to Italy as he appeared. Just as Carlo was reading the report on the relocation, the captain of the guard hurriedly rushed in. "Your Majesty, I just received the news that the governor of Borneo, Karali, passed away due to illness." What? Chapter 270 Candidate for the new governor. The news of Governor Caroli's death was simply bad news for Carlo and the Italian government. It doesn't matter that the former prime minister seems to be far away from home and has been serving in Borneo with little news. In fact, the Borneo colony is very important to the current Italy. I only need to tell you one fact and I believe everyone will know it. Rome has basically never refused requests from Borneo. In addition, data can also show this. Last year, Borneo handed over 72.1 million lire in fiscal revenue to Rome. If you add in the King Dynasty trade and other government gains in Borneo, this colony has brought great benefits to the Italian government. Hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue. Borneo has such a rapidly growing income, and the high output from tropical economic plants such as pepper and rubber is the key to the huge increase in income. Industrious Chinese and Italian immigrants, driven by the government, reclaimed a large number of fields and planted economic plants. In the world, the rubber from the Italian Borneo colony is of the best quality. At present, the area under rubber cultivation has reached nearly 80,000 acres, most of which have already produced rubber, with an annual rubber output of more than 5,000 tons. According to the current price of rubber in London of 1.62 shillings per pound, the rubber alone brings him 40 million lire in revenue. Driven by the Italian colonies, a large number of rubber plantations began to appear in other parts of Southeast Asia, but their scale and output were still too low, not even a fraction of those of the Italian colonies with more than 70 million in fiscal revenue. Borneo has become the most important fiscal and tax place in Italy. For Borneo to perform like this, the role of Kerala, the former prime minister, is crucial. You must know that among the colonies in Southeast Asia, the colonial government recognized as the most honest and efficient is the Italian Borneo government. Yes, in the Southeast Asian colonies, where corruption is serious, Italian Borneo officials earned a reputation for being able to do things efficiently despite receiving little money. As for the virtues of these officials, who among Carlo and the top government officials could not know that the performance of local government officials was naturally inseparable from the guidance of Kerala, the clever governor. Now his sudden death is a serious problem for Italy. Check to see if what the telegram says is true. Also, find the prime minister. I need to discuss it with the prime minister. Although Carlo was very surprised when he heard the news, he quickly gave a few orders. After serving as king for many years, the first one is naturally to find out whether what the telegram says is true. If it is true, it can only be regarded as an unexpected loss to Italy, but it would have been a disaster for the Borneo officials if the telegram contained any inaccurate information. As for discussing with the prime minister, this is understandable. After all, the successor to such an important financial and taxation power must be cautious. The captain of the guard, Felimich, also knew the importance of the matter and immediately walked out of the office and hurried to carry out the order, but within 2 minutes, he was back again. Your Majesty, the Prime Minister has arrived. It seemed that Depretis also knew the importance of this matter and hurriedly came to discuss it with Carlo. Your Majesty, I and all my colleagues in the government are deeply saddened by the death of Governor Kerala. However, since Governor Kerala has left, I don't know whether your Majesty has a suitable candidate for his successor. It was obvious that the Prime Minister was very worried about the successor. He had just received the news and came to the palace to inquire. Faced with the Prime Minister's inquiry, Carlo asked rhetorically, "Do you have any good candidates in the government?" Carlo's rhetorical question was that the governor of Borneo was too important. In addition, the matter came too suddenly, and he did not have a suitable candidate for the time being. Faced with Carlo's question, Depretis, as prime minister, immediately answered, "The government has just had urgent discussions and listed 3 candidates." Carlo was a little surprised when he heard the government's 3 options. It was too fast. In fact, it would be too fast to come up with candidates as soon as the news is received, but unfortunately this is not the case. The 3 candidates proposed by the Prime Minister are all plans made by the government before. After all, everything is possible, and the Borneo colony is currently Italy's favorite thing, so there are still some preventive measures. That's not all. The government has also made plans for conflicts with Spain, the Netherlands, Britain, France and other countries because of the colony. Compared with these plans, Governor Kerala's plan is considered child's play. As for Prime Minister Depretis, he also picked up the plan as soon as he received the news. Then, let's talk about the candidates chosen by your government. After getting Carlo's response, Prime Minister Depretis immediately spoke. The first person we selected is the Minister of Commerce and Trade, His Excellency Kranz Rivera. Due to the characteristics of the Borneo colony, we believe that expanding the colonial economy and trade and obtaining more benefits is the first priority. And Rivera, Your Excellency, you have served as Minister of Commerce and Trade in the cabinet for many years and have sufficient experience in business and trade, so you should be qualified for this position. Although the Prime Minister praised the Minister of Commerce and Trade with all kinds of flowers, Carlo is no stranger to this person. Although this person does have these advantages, he has a fatal flaw. That is, this river has always been wandering around in Rome. I had never done it anywhere. Carlo was not at all relieved to have this important place of wealth handed over to him rashly. So he didn't give the Prime Minister any response at all, but continued to ask, "Where are the other two?" As soon as he heard that the king did not ask the Minister of Commerce and Commerce, Desperatius, who had been dealing with Carlo for many years, knew that this man was out of luck. Without even asking, it seems that its desire to jump to a higher stage through Borneo can be extinguished. Yes, in the current Italian political arena, many people regard the governor of Borneo as the fourth position in the Italian government, after the Prime Minister, Speaker, and Foreign Secretary. Because of his distance, the Governor General is in charge of Italy's diplomacy, military and politics in the Far East, giving people the feeling of a trumpet Prime Minister. The second is the Governor of Sicily, His Excellency Cabrera. Under his governance, Sicily's economy has developed well, and he is also a good hand in handling local affairs. Seeing that Carlo was still listening, Depretis simply named the last candidate. In addition, His Excellency Antonio, the governor of East Africa, is also one of the candidates. He is a good hand in dealing with ethnic issues and can also strengthen our rule in Borneo. However, his performance in economic means is not very good, which is why I would put it third. It is true that from the government's perspective, the second-ranked governor of East Africa does not have an advantage when it comes to selecting the governor of Borneo. Because Borneo is more in need of candidates with excellent financial ability, Antonio did not show this advantage. Fortunately, it was not the government that decided on the governor of Borneo, but Carlo, the king, who chose the person. After listening to the Prime Minister's introduction, Carlo thought for a while and replied, "As for the question of candidates, let me consider it first, and give you an answer in 3 days." Prime Minister Desperatius, who knew that the matter was not decided so quickly, after hearing Carlo's words, knew that the next step would depend on the king's choice. Of course, his visit to the king this time was not just for the selection of the governor, but also for many other things. "Your Majesty, there are some things I need to report to you. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels." Chapter 271 Shadow. The first ray of sunshine in the morning shines on the earth, giving the street lights that have been on all night a rest. As time goes by, there are more and more people on the street. The vibrant city of Rome has entered another busy and lively day. Antonio stood on the balcony, looking at the city that was becoming more and more modern, and he was filled with emotions. "It's been a long time since I've been back to Rome, and the changes have been huge." He looked at the scene outside and couldn't help but admire it. Just when he wanted to see more of Rome, a knock on the door interrupted his thoughts. "Your Excellency, Speaker Crispy has arrived." The words of the entourage came from outside the door, asking Antonio to quickly tidy up and prepare to welcome his friend. "Antonio, I haven't seen you for so long, I almost don't recognize you." As soon as he entered the door, Speaker Crispy looked at Antonio, who appeared in front of him, and exclaimed, because the Antonio in front of him is very different from a few years ago. The Antonio before was not so dark, and there were probably too many wrinkles on his forehead. Faced with his friend's surprised expression, Antonio was not surprised, and he answered directly, "In East Africa, it's very difficult not to get tanned, but nothing has really changed. Tell me quickly, what have you done in these years to make such a big change? Although I have received a lot of letters from you before, I want to hear the content beyond the letters." Facing his curious friends, Antonio immediately answered, "As you wish, let's sit down and talk." Seeing that the two of them were planning to have a long conversation, the others closed the door and left with a wink. Antonio then briefly narrated his experiences over the years to his friend. During his narration, Speaker Crispy learned that his friend had visited all the East African colonies in the past few years, including Abyssinia and the Mahdi. He had been to the front lines of the kingdom's war several times, and he was so shocked that he called his friend so brave point at the same time. He asked curiously, "The Mahdi kingdom and Abyssinia are still at war?" Faced with the question from his friend, Antonio answered, "Yes, they are still fighting, but their war is a little different from ours." Antonio then explained to his friends how the bad war that was still going on was fought. It turns out that the two countries have been fighting over the disputed Lake Tana without admitting defeat. Every year when the off-season comes, the two countries have a fight in the Lake Tana area. If they win, they can grow crops here for a year, but if they lose, they will be left in despair. It was an eye-opener for Crispy to hear a battle that was like a duel. After a pleasant conversation, Crispy suddenly said seriously, "Antonio, your majesty calls you back to Rome this time. You should know what's going on." Seeing his friend talking about business, Antonio answered equally seriously, "Know some general information." After hearing Antonio's answer, Crispy immediately continued, "This summons is crucial. If his majesty is satisfied, it will be a matter of course for you to take over. But what are your plans for how to let his majesty make a choice?" Faced with the question from his friend, Antonio thought about it for a while before answering, "I have some ideas, but I don't know if they are suitable. Do you have any good suggestions?" Faced with Antonio's rhetorical question, Crispy immediately answered, "Actually, there are 3 candidates for the governor of Borneo this time. In the end, he summoned you to Rome for questioning. It is obvious that his majesty needs you. However, after all, Borneo is still the #1 tax revenue place, so it is more or less necessary to explain to his majesty plans for economic development. If you follow what I mean, when talking to his majesty, you need to focus on the description of economic development, and then talk about your expertise in ethnic adjustment and governing officials." After listening to his friend's suggestion, Antonio nodded and answered, "This is the same as what I imagined before, but I'm not very good at economic development. I'm afraid that his majesty will be disappointed by then." "This is how modest you are. What kind of place is East Africa? The land is barren and the products are not rich. There are even few minerals. You can manage the place in an orderly manner and hand over 5 million lire to Rome. You have performed very well." Faced with Crispy's compliment, Antonio shook his head. "This is all thanks to maritime transportation. If a few suitable ports were not cleared, I would really have no choice but to play in the sand in East Africa." Then the two talked together for a while. After waiting for a while, Crispy looked at the time and said, "You have to meet with his majesty at noon, so I won't disturb you. We'll talk after you're done." "Well, I won't send you out." The two parted, just like they did many years ago, without so many polite words. After Crispy returned to the carriage, he took a complicated look at the room where his friend was, and then said to the coachman, "I have fulfilled your master's request. Remember to make him fulfill his promise." Even though he has been in the political arena for decades, Crispy's face still gets a little hot when he thinks of exchanging friendship for profit. Although the speaker looks good, only those who can't do it know it. The Italian parliament is an eraser. He has been in this position for several years and cannot do this anymore. Something has to change, whether it's good or bad. It's better than talking to yourself every day in a group of people. In the room, after his friend left, Antonio kept sitting on the chair and meditating. He didn't wake up until his entourage knocked on the door again. After receiving the news that his friend had left, he picked up a manuscript from his box. This was the draft of his plan to talk to his majesty. The ideas in the manuscript are surprisingly similar to what Speaker Crispy said before, but now he plans to change it. This modification took a short while, and by almost noon, I finally had it done again. Satisfied, Antonio stretched to relieve his fatigue, and then prepared to meet his majesty. After doing all this, he suddenly said, "I hope I didn't think too much." Then He climbed into his carriage and set off for the palace. Antonio stayed in the palace for a total of 5 hours, waiting until the lanterns came on before leaving the palace. Under the attention of many pairs of eyes, the carriage carrying him returned to his residence all the way. Antonio was very happy when he returned to his residence. Fortunately, he revised the manuscript, otherwise if he had followed the original plan, this position would definitely not have fallen into his hands. This friend of mine has been a big help. The next day, Carlo signed an order appointing Antonio as the governor of Borneo, and also signed the candidate for the governor of East Africa. After his transfer, the new governor general of East Africa unexpectedly fell into the hands of Home Secretary Sabo. Regarding his transition from Home Secretary to Governor General in charge, no one except the person involved knew whether it was good or not. Of course, becoming the governor of Borneo would definitely be a huge improvement. And as Antonio got the governorship of Borneo, many ambitious people seemed to be discouraged and stopped. As for Antonio's friendship with the speaker, the friendship has not changed, and the two still chat in public. However, as Antonio goes to Borneo, where there is a need to receive a successor with a different style from the previous governor. I believe they are busy again. Chapter 272. The selection of the governor of Borneo can only be regarded as a small episode. Although it is very important to Italy, it is still very fast to solve this problem. At present, Italy's focus is still on the vigorous expulsion operations from new territories. Groups of locals who were driven out of their homes, carrying their own luggage and their families, left their homeland 3 times under the escort of the army. A large number of Italian immigrants also swarmed in under the guidance of the government and occupied the land and properties of these departed people. Is such a lucky man. Originally, he was just an unknown hunter in Sardinia, running around every day to support himself, his wife, children, and family, crossing mountains and ridges every day in search of prey. Although it is very hard, it still can only wrap your stomach. It is also a poor family ranked low in the village. In the previous war with the Ottomans, although he had wanted to fight hard, there were so many people in his family that kept him busy, and because he was too old, he was not able to take part in the war. I don't know why this time, but my family was actually selected to become one of the members of the new territory of the Immigration Kingdom. His family was the only one in their village to be selected, which made his family instantly become the focus, even though some of them couldn't eat grapes. He is a weird person, but he is more of a blessing. Fortunately, they didn't know that each new immigrant family would be allocated nearly 0.8 hectares of land, otherwise there would be even more jealous people. Although the allocated land is not free, it needs to be paid according to the market value. From the second year of farming, in addition to taxes, 5% of the total land value of agricultural products must be paid every year for 20 years. But for the Plank family, it was well worth it. After all, this land belongs to you, and you can do anything, as long as you are not lazy. So Plank cherished this opportunity very much, and he vowed never to let anyone take away his beautiful life in the future. So he squeezed the hand holding the gun hard again. He had seen those thugs composed of people who had slipped through the net. On the way to Kosovo, those thugs launched an attack on their team. Those gangsters with ferocious faces suddenly emerged from the woods and rushed towards them. The officers and soldiers guarding them immediately opened fire on them, and these people rushed towards them despite the firepower of the officers and soldiers, and a fight ensued. In order to protect his family, Plank also stepped forward to fight with the thugs. His little skills in hunting allowed him to take down several gangsters. The thugs who eventually attacked were driven away after leaving dozens of bodies behind. Of course, they also paid the price of more than 20 people, among whom a dozen of the escorting officers and soldiers fell. It was this fight that gave Plank a very clear understanding of his situation. So, after arriving at the destination, he immediately joined the escort team to protect this village composed of immigrants from all over the country from harm. Plank, just as he was protecting the village seriously, a shout attracted him. Plank followed the shouting, and a strong man walked towards him from a distance. The left sleeve is extremely eye-catching because it is empty and stuffed in the pocket. He was quite familiar with this man. He was Hammett, the militia captain of their village. Plank knew a lot about Captain Hammett. He was previously a squad leader of the 19th Division. He lost his left arm in the war with the Ottomans and had to retire. There were many cases like his after this war. The military and government mainly resettled these retired officers and soldiers who had fought for Italy. After seeking their opinions in new territories, these people are basically placed at the grassroots level and used as the backbone. These veterans are very good for Italy to strengthen its rule in the region. Moreover, this place is different from the complicated situation in the mainland. The new territory, where the Aborigines have just left, is more like a blank sheet of paper, which is convenient for the government to use. Hammett walked up to Plank and spoke. "Clank, I have something to tell you." "What's the matter, Captain?" "It's like this. The government is currently setting up a railway guard force, and our village has a recommended quota, and I want to give this quota to you. Do you want to go?" "What?" Hammett said is part of the government's construction, and is also a crucial issue of the start of construction of the Balkan Railway project. Rome and the local government don't want to wait any longer for this railway from Durrës to Skopje. While the army was still expelling the Albanian people, under the protection of the army, the exploration team of the Ministry of Transport was conducting line exploration work. After 3 months of exploration, the direction of this railway line has been determined. Now comes the question of preparing to start construction, but the manpower required to start construction is not like the few people required for exploration. This is at least thousands of people, and protecting their safety has become a very important matter. Although the military can still provide protection, the military has its own affairs. They were very busy expelling the Al people, wiping out the resistance forces, defending key areas, and patrolling the borders. It would be unjustifiable to blame this matter on the army. Therefore, forming a railway guard force has become the government's first choice. The government has made great efforts for this escort team. Each member has 80 lira and 150 kilograms of food per month. The positions of team leader and team leader can be added upwards. This is already very good for many immigrant families, and in order to ensure the strength of this team, the government uses 1 or 2 people from each village to draw out capable people. Such a team of more than 1,000 people can easily and quickly form combat effectiveness. Faced with the captain's request, Plank hesitated after hearing it because he was worried about the situation at home. It would take at least a year and a half to protect and build the railway. If he was not at home, what would he do if something happened at home? But he couldn't refuse the captain's kindness, so this put him in a dilemma. You worried about what will happen to your family if you leave? 1. Look at his hesitant expression, and Hammett knew what was going on. "I'm a little worried. The whole family, old and young, can't go home for a year and a half. How can we not be worried?" Faced with the captain's words, Plank made no secret of his thoughts. "There's nothing to worry about. The rest of the escort team and I can help you look after your home. We are all from the mainland, so we should take care of each other. You wouldn't think that there are dozens of people in our escort team who don't care about your home. I'll help you take care of your home." Even though the captain was talking about this, Plank still had the confidence to refuse. Since the captain valued him so much, Plank immediately agreed. And such a job that can not only serve the country, but also support the family is not easy to find. There were many immigrants like Plank who quickly integrated into the local environment, and they would form the cornerstone of Italian rule in the Balkans. As for those thugs who are causing trouble for the bandits, the army is stepping up their crackdowns. However, during the crackdown, the army also discovered some of the culprits behind the scenes. Chapter 273, The Anxious Chancellor of Finance. It's a new day, and the Prime Minister's office is extremely busy again. People come and go in the Prime Minister's office, and people are everywhere. This is the Ministry of Transport's new plan for the port of Durrës, and it needs to be given priority to the Prime Minister. The construction plan for the coal mine in Kosovo is waiting for funding from the Ministry of Finance after the Prime Minister signs it. Documents that required the Prime Minister's signature slowly piled up on his desk, making Prime Minister desperate is unable to raise his head at all. "Prime Minister, Your Excellency Tedula is here." The Secretary's words made Depretis finally raise his head. The 61-year-old finance minister is not much younger than the prime minister, and with the same silver hair, he shows his age. But despite this, it is still a little worse than the prime minister, wrinkled and tired. This is a current image of Prime Minister Depretis. Everyone, especially those close to the prime minister, know that the prime minister is aging very quickly. After entering this year, however, Depretis did not want to discuss this. When he brought the Chancellor of Finance, the prime minister raised his head and asked the finance minister to sit down before speaking. The reason why I came to you this time is this. The newly appointed governor Antonio reported a plan to me. Only after the prime minister's narration did finance minister Tedula know why the prime minister invited him here. As expected, he went to the Three Treasures Hall for no reason, just to get money. Antonio, the newly appointed governor of Borneo, had his own ideas after taking office and getting a preliminary understanding of the Borneo colony. Knowing that he could not compete with the old prime minister financially, so in order to leave his mark, he thought of another way out. Expand the colony of Borneo. Yes, Antonio wants to cause trouble, and his goal is to still hold the Netherlands, which is half of Borneo. And he also has good reasons. Compared with the prosperous Italian Borneo, Dutch Borneo is simply a backwater. The total investment by the Dutch in Dutch Borneo over the years was less than 10 million lire, and the largest investment was the construction of the road from Machen to Nahaboan. The main reason for building this road was to prevent the infiltration of Italian forces next door. In addition, Antonio didn't make this plan just by snapping his head. He also had practical needs. Although the construction of Italian Borneo is in full swing, one key factor has shrouded the minds of local people. That is, the places suitable for development in Italian Borneo have almost been developed. This is especially true for cash crops such as rubber pepper. At present, all the land suitable for these cash crops has been developed. If you want to continue development, you will need to pay additional costs, especially in the primitive areas in the interior, where the cost is even higher at this time. Dutch Borneo, which is almost stagnant in development next door, seems so delicious and tempting. When Antonio takes office, Depretis, as prime minister, should support Antonio's first request. However, because the funds required for his plan were not small, in order to avoid opposition from the Ministry of Finance, Tedula, who was the Minister of Finance, was first called in point. After listening to the Prime Minister's introduction, as expected, Tedula immediately expressed his objections. Prime Minister, I personally support Governor Antonio's plan in principle, but it costs too much. Isn't the investment of nearly 10 million lire a year inappropriate? Faced with the words of the finance minister, Prime Minister Depretis smiled and defended Governor Antonio. The money is not much at all. I have already calculated it. Both the personnel composition and the expenditure are very reasonable. After comparison, the income is already very good. There is a reason for the Prime Minister to excuse Antonio. In Antonio's plan, only 4 or 5 years of preparation are needed to seize the territory of Dutch Borneo for Italy. Although these lands are basically undeveloped, and the soil quality is not as good as that to the west, they can still expand the benefits of Borneo for Italy. According to his estimation, it would only take 4 or 5 years of development for the Borneo colony to provide Italy with an income of over 100 million lire every year. Such a return on investment is one of the main reasons why the Prime Minister is willing to support Governor Antonio. Of course, diplomacy and other aspects need to be calculated separately. But for Tedula, although the return on investment is very attractive, it is difficult to meet the requirement of reducing the revenue of the Ministry of Finance by nearly 10 million liras per year within 4 to 5 years. Prime Minister, you are also familiar with the current situation of the Ministry of Finance. Last year, we spent 2.471 billion lire due to the war, and this year due to the development of new territories, another expenditure of up to 514 million lire. And according to the plan, in another 429 million liras will be invested next year. Prime Minister, you should be aware of the fiscal gap in recent years. Currently, the annual yield on our Italian 10-year government bonds has increased to 3.18%, which is already very high. We need to pay 1.92 in interest alone every year. Billions of liras. If we continue to spend without restraint, Financial bankruptcy is not impossible. Besides, Depretis did not expect that the Chancellor of Finance would suddenly explode and reveal all the bad things in the Ministry of Finance. It's not his fault. Anyone who serves as finance minister would be the same as this one when faced with Italy's mounting debt. Fortunately, Italy has developed well in recent years. Otherwise, as in history, it would have been on the verge of financial bankruptcy, leading to numerous domestic problems, and the past 10 years would have been wasted. Faced with the angry Chancellor of Finance, Depretis of course couldn't stand up to him. He could only go along with it. If that's the case, then why don't you reduce some expenses from other places and raise this money? After venting her anger towards the amiable Prime Minister, Tedula recovered. He said with a bitter look on his face, "My Prime Minister, where can the current government reduce expenditure? The current expenditure of each department has been carefully calculated, and it is impossible to reduce it. And I'm not saying that the only way to reduce expenditure is at present. The only place where the expenses are is the royal family's expenses. I really don't think of any other way to reduce expenses." Depretis was dumbfounded by Tedula's suggestion. Although reducing the royal family's expenses seems feasible, it is not easy to achieve. Moreover, this is not something that the king can do just by nodding his head. If he brought it up, the Savoy family would still hate him to death. Faced with this situation, Depretis' old habit of hesitation returned. "Is there any other way?" He was greeted by the finance minister, who was shaking his head. In the end, Antonio's plan to expand Italian Borneo was sent to Carlo's desk, along with suggestions from the finance minister on reducing royal expenses. The great superintendent of Guanglu Temple, baked the steamed buns with butter. Chapter 274. Not sensible enough. What a problem. Carlo looked at the two plans that were sent to him and couldn't help but pick up his scalp. Although Carlo was the king of Italy, the Savoy family was also the eldest family, and the annuities of many members were their indispensable income. This method of reducing annuity income is simply unrealistic. It will inevitably lead to strong opposition. As the most important member of the family, it is also impossible for him to stand against the family members for this. Chief Guard, go and fetch Mr. Alucard. At present, Carlo has thought of a way, but he needs the help of this palace wise man. Without letting Carlo wait any longer, the palace steward Alucard appeared in front of Carlo. "I have met His Majesty." Looking at the palace steward, who was getting older and older, Carlo couldn't help but asked with concern, "Mr. Alucard, how are you lately?" Faced with Carlo's concern, the palace steward spoke. "It's not bad. Although there are constant minor problems, I feel like I can still hold on for a few more years. I'm here to see you, sir, this time. I have something to ask." In Carlo's mouth, he told the old man the whole story of the incident and his thoughts. After listening to Carlo's story, Director Alucard nodded and replied, "Your Majesty's idea is very good, and the royal family property can also provide this money. However, since this money is loaned to the government, interest must be included, even if it is calculated based on bank loan interest. This is necessary." That's right. Carlo plans to lend money to the government from the royal family. Although this is just a roundabout way, at least in name it does not reduce the royal family's funds, and the family members will not object to this. As for the additional suggestions made by Chief Legenda, Carlo also admitted that he had not considered them thoroughly before. Although these interest rates are not high, one code is one code, and some things need to be clearly distinguished to avoid trouble. Now that it was decided, Carlo called the captain of the guard and informed the prime minister of his decision. After solving this matter that may have an impact on Attila's future, Carlo picked up a document he had seen before, which was a war report from Libya. After a month of hard fighting, the clearing operation led by Libyan Governor General Howard Georgi and commanded by General Brennan finally produced results. After 3 cavalry brigades fighting with nearly 10,000 people, they wiped out 5 large tribes, 7 medium-sized tribes, and several small tribes in 1 month. A total of 57,000 people were killed and captured, more than 5,000 guns of various types, tens of thousands of other weapons, more than 70,000 cattle and sheep, more than 8,000 horses, more than 900 camels, and more than 7 million lire of various properties were confiscated. In a sense, this operation is not bad, shrouding the majesty of Italy in this barren land. Point of course, this operation did not go unscathed. 619 Italian troops were killed, 391 were injured, and 27 were missing. The number of killed in action was higher than the number of injured, which fully illustrates the suffering suffered by the army in this clearing operation. Moreover, behind the battle report, Governor George was still complaining that many officers and soldiers killed in battle were caused by the lack of doctors and medicines. Due to the shortage of doctors and medicines, some officers and soldiers suffered minor injuries that turned into serious injuries and then died as a result. Regarding Governor George's complaints, Carlo has no good solution now. The only thing he can do is to appeal to doctors to join the army and serve the country. This is just asking current doctors to give up their comfortable lives and generous remuneration to serve the country, which is a bit difficult. Italians have not experienced the baptism of Confucianism. Although nationalism is prevalent in Italy, like other countries, nationalism is more prevalent among people at the bottom, those who have just made ends meet and read some books. It is really difficult for a middle-class doctor like a doctor to give up his respectable life and go to the army to eat sand. This is not just a situation unique to Italy. Military doctors are a persistent problem throughout Europe and even in Germany, which has the strongest military atmosphere. Of course, Carlo was more concerned about another thing than such a small problem as military doctors. That was this cleanup operation, and he was a little dissatisfied with the results. Yes, he was not very satisfied with the results of this victory. The reason is simple, because this is the first action, and those tribes are not prepared yet. Under such circumstances, only more than 50,000 people were found in the surprise attack, which was not an outstanding result. And he had a hunch that, although there were only 200,000 to 300,000 people in Libya, these local snakes would become particularly difficult to catch if they became vigilant. The local tribes are familiar with the local environment and terrain. Catching them is like catching a loach with bare hands. These slippery local people will not give them such a good opportunity again. Thinking of this, he would not have high expectations for the next cleanup operation in Libya. Moreover, there are no perennial rivers in Libya, which lacks sufficient attraction for Italian farmers who basically focus on planting agriculture. It is a huge test for the Libyan governor to complete the immigration mission. Thinking of this, Carlo called a guard. Send a message to the Prime Minister and ask him to favor Libya to a certain extent in terms of funding and policy. Also send a message to Governor Howard Georgi, telling him that in addition to wiping out the local tribes, he needs to let the locals solve the food supply problem, although the latter question should be raised by the Prime Minister. Carlo looked at the situation of consumption in Libya and decided to speak first. Because he saw a list of materials transported by Libya in the past few months. It can be said that everything in Libya currently needs to be transported from the country, ranging from grain, horseshoes, and nails to steam engines, coal, and various machines. There is a lot of these supplies, costing the government at least nearly 2 million lire every month. During this period of clearance operations, Libya spent more than 7 million lire. Not to mention, the local garrison will be required to continue fighting, and the cost will be even higher. In line with the attitude of saving money for the government, Carlo believed that it was necessary to ask Governor Howard Georgi to save money. Although this harvest is pretty good and can cover the local expenses for several months, it will also cost a lot to transport these North Africans to East Africa. When he thought about these rising expenses, Carlo really regretted it. In order to avoid future troubles, Italy's fiscal expenditures have been so high that they are almost out of breath. You must remember this lesson next time. You are still too impatient and not rational enough. Just as Carlo was swearing an oath to himself, a guard suddenly reported that Foreign Minister Jiminy Bacona wanted to see him. Maybe it will be just one chapter tomorrow. I have something to delay. Chapter 275 Signs of Sino-Japanese War. As soon as he entered the door, Foreign Minister Bacona said with a strange expression, "Your Majesty, I have something to report to you." "What's the matter, my foreign secretary?" Seeing the constipated foreign minister, Carlo was very curious. "Your Majesty is like this." In Bacona's narration, he finally knew something. Today, Japanese ambassador Tanaka Kiichi found Bacona. After a pass of useless politeness, he expressed Japan's idea of purchasing 2 Venice-improved ships from Italy. At present, Italy's Venice-improved class is very conspicuous in the world warship market. In addition to Argentina purchasing 4 ships, many navies are also interested in it. Among them, the Kingdom of Spain is negotiating with Italy about the idea of purchasing a Venetian improved class. The only problem at present is that the Spanish Navy is cash-strapped and hopes that Italy will lower the price. In addition, Chile, which was bullied by Argentina in the same style, also has the idea of purchasing. However, their problem is that the British influence is very strong in the Chilean Navy, and there is considerable resistance to purchasing ships from Italy. However, unlike conventional ship purchases, the Japanese ambassador hopes to obtain 2 warships of this class at the price purchased by Argentina. He also hopes that Italy can provide 40% of the loan amount for the ship purchase, and Japan is willing to provide an annual interest rate of 3.5%. Japan will repay the principal and interest over 5 years. The news brought by Bacona forced Carlo to put down what he was doing and set his sights on the Far East. What is the current situation in Japan facing Carlo's inquiry? Your Excellency, the Foreign Secretary, had obviously done his homework before coming, and Bacona immediately spoke. According to our diplomatic understanding, the current situation in Japan is not good. Due to Japan's revealed ambitions on the Korean peninsula, the country is preparing for war. In addition to the Japanese Navy currently building the Sankei ship that is about to be completed in France, Japan is also actively looking to purchase armored cruisers from various countries. As far as I know, in addition to asking my country to purchase 2 Venice-class ships, Japan is also making the above request to Britain and France, and the conditions are similar to those of our country. After hearing what the Foreign Secretary said, Carlo reacted. Are you saying that the Japanese are testing the attitudes of other countries in many ways? Faced with Carlo's inquiry, Minister Bacona immediately replied, it's very possible. These cunning Japanese monkeys. In fact, Carlo had wronged the Japanese. Japan was very sincere in purchasing the 2 Venice improved ships. Due to the influence of Carlo's giant butterfly, the current strength of the Peng Navy's cruiser formation has greatly increased. One more thing to say here is that due to the flag withdrawal incident last year, Langley left with all the British advisors, which caused great harm to the Peng Navy. Although Li Zhangtang later appointed Italian consultant Rear Admiral Antonio as chief advisor, in order to prevent the Navy from stalling all training due to lack of consultants and to let the British know how powerful he was. Promoted from colonel to rear admiral for reasons such as promoting naval exchanges between King and Italy. However, probably because of Langley's stimulation, Major General Antonio only received the position of Chief Inspector of the Peng Navy, but did not receive the rank of admiral that Langley had at the time. This also led to Major General Antonio's lack of prestige in the Peng Navy, and also it was not enough to get the Peng Navy, which had begun to relax, back on track. For this reason, Antonio complained to his friends in China that Li Zhangtang, in addition to wanting to control the Peng Navy, did not have enough knowledge about naval construction. Returning to Japan's purchase of ships, if Japan continues to purchase Myoko, Haeonami, Yoshino and other ships according to history, there will only be one result. The Japanese Navy's combined fleet will be hoisted and beaten by the Peng Navy. The 2 7,000-ton Venice-class ships are a problem that it cannot solve. Although this high-speed cruiser is even 1 or 2 knots faster than the Zealand, formerly Venetian, and Jingilan, formerly Brescia, its firepower and protection can only be beaten. And if its high-speed cruiser formation cannot entangle the 2 ships, then other Japanese warships will be surrounded by the 4 distant points. So now the Japanese Navy has reached a consensus that it needs to purchase warships that can suppress 2 Venice-class cruisers. If this condition is used as a requirement, the Japanese will not have many choices. Currently, there are only 3 warships in the world that can suppress or compete with the Venetian-class armored patrols: Britain, France, and Italy. Among them, France's installation patrol did not satisfy the Japanese because the construction concept of the installation patrol was wrong. The only praiseworthy thing is the speed, but the firepower and protection are far behind those of the Venice class. In addition, its price is much higher than that of the Venice improved class. The only advantage is that it carries 6 torpedo launch tubes. However, with the current range of torpedoes, I don't know what the French think about letting the patrol launch torpedoes close to them. As for the British mounted patrols, there are currently 2 types, including the 10,000-ton mounted patrol. After the Japanese asked about it once, there was no further information. This is not to say that this patrol equipment is not good, but it is very good. Whether it is fire protection or speed, it exerts a suppressive force on the 2 Venice-class ships. But its price is too expensive and Japanese people cannot afford it. As for the other 7,000-ton Blade-class cruiser, it can only compete with the Venetian class, but it cannot suppress it, and it does not meet Japan's needs. Therefore, the Japanese have very limited choices, and the Venice improved class is their best choice. However, the current financial resources of the Japanese government are limited each year. In addition to the navy, they also need to equip the army, so if they want to obtain 2 Venice improved ships, they need to borrow money. That's why Japanese Ambassador Tanaka Kiichi asked for a loan from Italy. If Italy agrees, it will not benefit Japan too much. This is not just a military aspect, it can even show the importance that Italy attaches to the Far East in diplomacy. Don't think that the Japanese are worrying in vain. Here is a data that can explain everything. In terms of the current import and export trade of the Qing dynasty, according to customs data obtained by Heard, the largest trading country of the Qing dynasty is Italy, which accounts for 23.7% of the import and export share, followed by the United Kingdom with a share of 22.9%, although the profit rate of trade with the Qing dynasty was far less than that of other great powers due to the purpose of capturing the market. For Italian industry, this was the most important market, no one. As for exports, Italian traders are also the first choice of many Chinese merchants due to their reputation as group agents and fair and reasonable bids. One more thing to say here is that in the current trade between various countries and the Qing dynasty, all the major powers have learned from Italy's approach and sent equipment maintenance personnel to every major industrial city. Their approach is exactly the same as Italy's. Many manufacturers hire one maintenance person. Being responsible for the equipment of these manufacturers in the region can be considered a change brought by Italy. Manufacturers that did not make changes had long been abandoned by Qing buyers. Although manufacturers from other countries have made changes, Italy has still grown its share larger and stronger by virtue of its first mover advantage. The most obvious sign is that Germany's share of industrial product exports to Italy is declining. Although there is only a contraction of 3 or 4 points, it also shows that Italian factories are relying on the profits gained from trade with the Qing dynasty to nurture the domestic market and are gradually taking back the market from Germany. The process may take a long time, but the momentum has turned. This also shows the current importance of the Qing dynasty to Italy. Any attempt to change the Qing dynasty may lead to a fierce reaction from Italy. As a Japanese government composed of outstanding politicians, it is impossible not to see this situation. Besides, Japan is not France, so it cannot bear the consequences of intervention. As for what the Japanese were thinking, Carlo could more or less guess part of it. Although Japan's order for the 2 Venice improved ships looked very attractive, considering the relationship with the Qing dynasty in trade, Carlo had to give up in the end. Tell the Japanese ambassador that our country can sell warships to it, but it must be paid in full. Carlo's words obviously meant rejection. If Japan could pay the full amount, there would be nothing to worry about. Okay, Your Majesty, I will reply to the Japanese ambassador right away. Although Bacona regrets that Italy has lost its order for 2 warships, the priorities are still clear. At present, Italy cannot afford to lose the Qing market, and Japan's orders can only be said to be sorry, etc. Just when Bacona was about to leave, Carlo suddenly stopped him again. Your Majesty, is there anything else? Let's do this. Send a message to our ambassador in the Qing dynasty and inform them that Japan has ambitions on the Korean peninsula. It does not rule out the ambition to launch a war against the Qing dynasty for this reason. Although Carlo felt that his words were probably useless, it would be good if Li Zongtang could pay more attention to them. As you command, Your Majesty, the Italian reminder telegram appeared in the Zili governor's yamen in Tianjin more than 10 days later. However, Li Zongtang didn't even have time to read Italy's warning point because the war between him and Wang Di's division spread everywhere. The Beiyang Navy, as an important part of the Hui army, still did not escape his poisonous hands. The Ang Emperor asked the government to stop the Navy's purchase of foreign ships on the grounds that the Navy's scale has grown and the country's expenditures are difficult. This is not good news for Li Zongtang's Hui army. He is currently too busy fighting with Wang Di to worry about other things. So this Italian goodwill can only gather dust in the corner. End of this chapter. Thank you very much for reaching the end. Don't forget to like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription, or donation encourages us to continue. Thanks to everyone. See you in the next video.